It's a diamond in the centre.
They're things of natural beauty.
This is so untypical, this picture.
It's a part of history.
Very classic part of English furniture history.
An extraordinary collection.
Perfect. It's
Wonderful.
stunning.
Well, that really is a staggering collection that you brought in.
They were my mother-in-law's, and they were in the bank. And it wasn't until after her death, 12 years ago, that we discovered this jewellery in the bank. So
I'm going to start from the most recently made piece, and then I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to start with this one here. Emerald and diamond brooch, that very geometric, rectangular look would date that to Art Deco. This is absolutely right for round about 1930.
yes.
And during that time, you know, firms like Cartier and their contemporaries were making very, very linear looking jewellery. But the emerald in the middle of this piece is a lovely, dark, blue-green colour, and it's just the kind of colour that the market most looks for. Now, the earrings here, emerald and diamond earrings, are a totally different thing. They are in Victorian gold and silver settings, where the stones themselves are individually mounted up in gold, and they've got diamond frames where you've got these old Victorian cut diamonds, probably around about the start of Victoria's reign, 1840, 1845. Now we move on. Look at that.
They are superb.
Oh,
They're stunning.
wonderful. Emeralds in canatile gold settings. Canatile is a word that we use to describe this kind of very complex filigree scroll work. Now, if I can turn it over and have a look at the back of it, there's the canatile work, and there at the bottom is a hook. And suspended from that hook might originally have been something like a larger cluster. The stones themselves are individually foiled. And that's another thing to bear in mind. They've got this uniformity of bright grass green colour, but we might find that if you were to remove one of those stones, it has a tin foil behind to enhance the colour. The actual necklace itself, we can date to round about the reign of William IV, that sort of period.
Really?
So it's that early.
Gosh.
I'm very taken with that. So, value. Now, the Art Deco brooch is wearable, top quality, platinum mounted. At auction, it would probably go up to round about £2,500 to £3,000. The earrings, emeralds and diamonds again, I'm noting the old cut of the diamonds, but they are exquisitely commercial. One would be expecting them to make maybe 4,000 or 5,000. Moving on to the necklace, I think that if it was offered at auction, it would probably make about £8,000.
Really?
Yeah. So add those together, something approaching £15,000 to £20,000. I'm thrilled you bought them. Thanks very much indeed. The light here shows us how very white these diamonds are, because this is a diamond parure of jewellery. Parure, a set,
Yes.
brooch and matching drops for the ears. The period of design for something like this is very much late 1940s, start of the 1950s,
Yes.
when London jewellers used to make jewellery like this, very white, using brilliant cuts, which are the round diamonds, and in this case, baguette cut diamonds. And you know the way it is, ladies would go to cocktail parties where they would wear their sets of jewellery. Sometimes with these drops for the ears, you could remove the diamonds, and I see you can, can't you?
Yes, you can.
You could wear them as simple cluster clips on the lobe during the daytime, and at night time you would put your baguette diamond
Yes.
drops on. Nighttime, daytime earrings.
Yes.
Very, very practical indeed. You've got the additional facility on the brooch that you can remove it from the frame like that. You pull back these clip fittings. I'll show you there. You just pull that like that. That dismantles, and then you can wear one on one side of your lapel and one on
Weren't
the
they
other.
very fashionable in the 50s to wear clips?
Very much so, and in the 30s too.
Were they? Yes.
And you could imagine how striking that would look. Now, you've also brought in something that is utterly different from this. I mean, you couldn't get two pieces or three pieces that were so different in design. This is a totally aesthetic piece of jewellery, isn't it? It's very, very subtle, it's very delicate. Whereas this is all flash and show, this is far more gentle. Do you know about this? I mean, I'm assuming that they didn't come from the same place or at different times, or what?
I don't know. This belonged to my grandmother. That I do know, so it won't have come from the same place as this jewellery. And my grandmother gave me that when I was 21.
The jeweller who's made this has actually managed to get a range of different coloured sapphires. These are blue ones, and here we've got some pink sapphires. And these are almost like moonstones, but they're actually like a liquid white coloured sapphire. And they're from Ceylon, I would think, and that's where you get all these different multicoloured sapphires. And then you've got the frame, which is all enamelled in bright green, very vibrant. So there is a sense of contrast between the stones and the frame.
Yes.
Now, the key about this is you've got a little cartouche-shaped maker's mark at the top there.
Yes.
That maker's mark tells me that this is a piece of jewellery made by that very famous house who were working in the Victorian times called Giuliano. And you had...
It is them.
It is them. Did you have a suspicion that it might have been?
I've never ever had anybody look at it before, but I hope that it might be.
Well,
so
I'm
to
delighted to
like that.
confirm that it is. It's not Carlo Giuliano the father. It's
Yes.
actually the sons, and they've got a slightly different mark there.
Oh.
And we can date this piece to about 1890. It's getting towards the end of the Victorian period.
Yes.
You've also got, just as an extra bonus, a matching chain to go with it as well. Although I'm looking at that and that hasn't got a maker's mark on it. But this is absolutely right and correct and proper for the period by this maker.
Yes.
And it's colourful, it's delicate, it's wearable, and it's deeply commercial.
Oh, thank you.
Right, well, let's talk about values. The diamond clip brooch, each side here has got about 6 carats of diamonds. That counts to about 12 carats of diamonds. So at basic break-up price for this diamond brooch, we would be looking at maybe £4,000 or £5,000. The earrings to go with it, the fact it's a set adds a little boost to it as well. So I think those earrings are something around the £3,000 to £3,500 region. And then we move to this. Now, I would like to think that if this was being sold, the interest would be comprehensive, and I think it's probably going to be worth something in the region of £6,000 for this as well.
Yes.
That's the key name.
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
I bought it at a local auction rooms just a few weeks ago.
What, from
Local
round
to
here?
Well, local to North Wales, yes.
How much did you pay?
£120.
Well, certainly when I saw the name Franklin, Duke Street, St James's, London,
Yes.
very good name indeed. It's a sautoir. This is what they're called.
Sautoir.
Sautoir, and it would have been worn as a long necklace round the
Right.
neck, and the ends of it would literally extend down right the way to the waist.
Yeah.
And they were very popular from about 1895, particularly through to around about 1905. They're real pearls.
Oh.
So you've got a woven line, a sort of plaited spiraled line of real pearls.
Oh, lovely.
Look at the diamonds, because that's what they are in these caps. You've got these finials, these sort of terminal points here.
Yes.
They look like little caps, but each of the lines are set in silver with tiny, tiny diamonds, rose-cut diamonds.
Rose-cut ones. Right.
And then each of these sort of terminals suspends at the bottom a series of rubies. They're all set in gold,
Yes.
alternating with little cubes.
That's right,
And each
yes.
of the cubes is individually set with more tiny diamonds.
Diamonds. Right.
And then suspended at the end of the last ruby is yet another tassel terminal with more diamonds in the cap, all silver set by the way,
Yes.
and then a series of real pearl fringe drops. But the staggering thing about all this is that you've managed to acquire a fairly important piece of jewellery for £120.
Yes.
Because I think that if one was selling this, it would probably make £3,000.
Oh my goodness me. That's a lot of money.
My brother bought it from my mum from a jumble sale when he was young for 2p.
A 2p?
Yeah, 2
So tuppence?
Yeah.
With the old
money. My mum said she wanted something nice, so brother bought that.
Well, clearly a flower brooch. Austrian. These flashy little white stones, they're diamonds.
Fair enough.
And turning it over, the back of the frame, white gold, rather beautifully set like a claw on each of these petals. petals made out of frosted rock crystal. What the mauve stone is? That's purple amethyst quartz. So all real gems, white gold, tiny diamonds in a flash, Austrian, circa 1960, 1965.
Go on.
Value,
Yeah.
if you were selling this in an auction today, £500?
No way.
Every way possible. Very, very pretty little brooch.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Lovely.
My grandmother handed it down to me when she passed away a few years ago at the age of 102.
Goodness gracious me.
So-
Well, now look at that.
She left all this
Look at that.
for me as
Because
well.
here we have a veritable cabinet of curiosities. It's an extraordinary collection of Georgian and Victorian jewellery. Let's have a look at this one first, because this does catch my eye. And this is a Georgian gold Belcher link chain. And typically it's got a hand clasp terminating at the bottom. On the finger of the clasp is this little gem set ring. It's a beautiful little piece. There's another gold chain made out of spun gold. I mean, considering it was probably made in about 1825, 1830, you can see the technique, the sophistication that would have been made. Then there's some really delightful mourning rings. Now, the thing about mourning rings is, of course, when someone died, it was customary to commemorate the person by mounting a small lock of hair in a locket centre, surrounding it quite frequently with half pearls. Being mourning, the colour was black, always going to be black. And then at the back of the ring, we might find a small sort of engraving of the person's name, the date that they passed on. And then also you might find a tiny little locket compartment where there would be a small lock of hair. Do you wear them at all?
I have actually worn this little one. Sean and I got married in Winchester Guildhall last year dressed up in medieval costume, and I did actually wear that.
And that was the actual ring that you wore?
I did wear that one, yeah.
Let's just have a look at that one then, because it's quite a simple ring, really. It's a late Victorian gold ring with a sapphire in the middle, surrounded by a sort of posy of half pearls. So I assume then that apart from knowing it's come down the family, you've never actually had it valued before?
No.
Well, I think on the basis that a Georgian gold muff chain like this is a little shorter than the very long ones that you get, that by itself is probably worth something around £1,000. This fine mesh tubular chain necklace, that's probably worth around about £600 to £800. The rings, you've got the half hoop ring there, lovely diamonds, 5 graduated stones, that's worth about £800 to £1,000. The mourning rings are worth between £300 and £400 each. So from what looks like a fairly sort of straight Sheffield plate set, which is worth maybe no more than around about £300, you've got a lower tier drawer, which is probably worth £8,000.
God. Oh, I didn't realise that at all.
It really is a unique collection.
Goodness me.
I had it for my 21st birthday from my grandfather.
So family ring, going back the years,
Going
generations?
back probably only to the beginning of the 1900s, when it belonged to my step-grandfather.
Well, it's almost got the head of the ring is like a box. What a pretty garnet in the middle there, isn't it? That purpley colour garnet. Looks a bit like a ruby, but I think looking at this purple colour, it's going to be a garnet in a surround of tiny diamonds that form almost like a star. And then we've got enamel, which I must say, when I first thought I saw that, I thought that they were turquoise, but they're not. It's that sky blue colour.
Yeah.
So that combination of stones and colour was often used in Victorian jewellery.
Yes.
But there's something interesting about this ring, isn't there?
There is.
Because the whole thing is like a concertina. And there, instead of just having a ring,
A bracelet.
it's a lady's bracelet. So, I mean, it's beautiful as a ring, but as a bracelet, it is a dimension that is just fantastic, really. And they used to do this in the Victorian period. What date do you think it is?
Well, I think it's probably early Victorian, about 1840.
1845, 1850 would be about the latest I would put on it, and it's very much 1840. It's very pretty jewellery, I have to say. I mean, it sounds a slightly odd thing to say, but jewellery of that period was very feminine. I think it's very, very saleable indeed. I know you're not going to sell such a ring because, of course, it's a family ring, but
Yeah.
I think such a ring like that, because of its feature that you can do so many different things with it, means that buyers would be very excited to see one like this. And I think in auction, £1,000 to £1,500 for
Yes.
it, I would
Yeah.
think. The balance of this for me is perfect. I love the whole shape of it, and I'm particularly fond of pendants, but is it something that you particularly look at and think this is a very, very pretty piece?
Yes, it's a beautiful piece. The shape of it's lovely, and just the emerald drop is absolutely beautiful. And remembering that it was my mother-in-law's, it makes it very special.
Yes. I mean, all the right sort of ingredients are there. You've mentioned what the principal stone is
Yes.
there. They're interesting, because they're not always fantastic quality. The best of them come from Colombia, and they are characterized by this very intense blue-green color. Then they get very wishy-washy sometimes, and they get so pale that, frankly, they look like very, very pale sort of marked glass. But the very best ones come from Colombia, and it's got that intense blue-green color. So, looking at the diamonds, we've got this, what you might call a sort of stylized palmette-shaped top to it. The diamonds themselves are set in individual little settings where you've almost got a cup that grips the diamonds in place. The front of it, incidentally, is all mounted up, as you might have thought, in this very white finish in platinum. But then when we turn it over, look at the back of it, we see that it's actually backed in yellow gold.
I've never noticed that.
It's unusual that you see that sort of yellow mount. Now, that means we can date this probably to around about 1905.
Right.
After then, the jewellery was more or less totally superseded by platinum. So it's quite an early piece for its period. On the platinum chain, let me just have a look at that. What an emerald. I mean, it really is a cracking stone. It's a really deep blue-green colour of an intensity and uniformity that is just what people look for. So, there's the ingredients. The value for something like this is far higher than you would expect to break the stones out for. With a lot of pieces of jewellery that are made maybe in the 1950s and 60s, they are described as what we call break-up. You look at the content of diamonds and think, well, the mount's not particularly beautiful. And all I would reckon it at is the break-up of the stones. No way on something like that. That is going to fetch a price based on its beauty and its wearability. I think if this was being sold in auction, it's going to make something in the region of £3,500.
It's lovely. It's lovely. It belongs to my daughter, so she will be very pleased.
Shall I tell you what I think it is? I think it's a snowflake.
Oh, right, okay.
I think it's a snowflake brooch pendant. And the beauty of it is to have this contrast of all the different rainbow colours of gems. Look at the diamonds, they form this nice flash in between each of the gems themselves. But all the gems are different mixtures of semi-precious and precious gems in a snowflake cluster surround. Now, usually when they enclose the back of a gold brooch of this sort of period, you can see right the way through to the gems themselves. This is fully closed in at the back, which actually is a little confusing, because I think, looking at the stones at the front, that this is late Victorian. Usually when they enclose the whole back of the mount, that is usually Georgian, but I don't think this is a Georgian brooch at all. I think this was made in about 1895. So it's a full range of colourful late Victorian gems in a frame of diamonds, and the middle stone is a peridot. But it is individually numbered on the back there, and that's good because it shows it's a quality piece made by a quality manufacturer. I think if it was being offered in a retail shop, it would probably sell today for £6,000 to £6,500. That's my feeling about it.
I inherited it from my aunt, whose husband gave it to my aunt during their marriage, but I don't know the history of it apart from that.
It's an interesting cluster ring. When I first saw it, I thought to myself it's going to be something like a topaz or one of these brown stones. Yes. Sometimes you get things like brown sapphires. Yes. It's a diamond in the centre. And on this side we have another one in white. But the thing about this ring that's most interesting is this one, because this is a bluey green one. All diamond set, but all different colours. And from my point of view, seeing coloured diamonds, well, it always is very exciting because coloured diamonds are extremely rare. This one is almost a sort of yellowish brown colour, but this one is the one that's quite exciting because one of the rarest colours that you can find are blue, and even rarer is the colour green. The surrounding line of diamonds around the three principal stones is a different period from the three centre stones. I think it's certainly Victorian, this cluster, with this type of silver setting, this nipped-in setting here. But when we look at the three principal diamonds, we see that they're all claw-set stones. The diamonds themselves are cushion-shaped Victorian cut stones, and I think they were probably cut in maybe around about 1900 or 1905 at the very latest. As far as trying to value fancy diamonds is concerned, it is very, very difficult. There are so many subtle nuances of colour. You get greyish blue, bluish grey, greenish blue, bluish green, and what you have to do with them is to send them off to a laboratory where they will actually issue a certificate stating exactly what the colour is. Let's suppose that it comes back as being a natural, fancy green-blue diamond or blue-green diamond, and that they can say it with certainty, in which case I'm going to be very broad with my pricing here and say hopefully at least £2,500 to £3,000, but it could very well be worth £5,000 with all the right gradings.
Well, that's very good news. Thank you.
My grandfather bought them for my grandmother over the years. And I think he must have bought them in London.
It's very tricky with jade. Issues with jade you have to bear in mind are colour, uniformity of colour through the stone, shape of the stone, size of course, patina. If you get a piece of jade that's very scratched and you get one that's very smooth and perfect, it's considerably more valuable for being a perfect stone than one that might have a few abrasions on it. But you know, when we look at these two, that's a piece of jade.
It's fabulous, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, as far as the age is concerned, the diamond setting is very 1925.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that that's the period for the ring itself. I ought to add one little caveat, which is these days jade is improved. They impregnate, they do all sorts of things to make them look slightly better than they are. The good news is, though, it's unlikely with a stone of that date. This one here, have you noticed it's got a slightly wedge shape? It's almost as if it's been polished slightly off, and that does affect the interest a little.
Yeah.
Then you've got this splendid deco jade brooch, where I think they must have taken a couple of pieces of Chinese jade that have been carved, set them in little settings of diamonds, this flash, it's almost like a geometric bow, and then you've got these calibre black little hard stones in between, and this colour combination, the black, the white, the green, was very deco.
Yeah.
Now, let me just have a look at these jade pieces, because these are a fantastic colour, aren't they? These are wonderful. Now one small anxiety I've got, and I'm sure you have noticed it, it's got a crack running all the way through it.
In fact, the mount's been made to hold it because it's got more claws on that side.
And they're very thin slices, aren't they?
Yeah.
These are the sort of things that would have been done in China, and you know, you could wear them as clips for the ears or something, but these have been made into a brooch. And then finally, you've got this terrific, terrific Chinese jade carving, which by its quality, I mean, look at the detail here, the little birds, the piercing.
And what sort of a flower is that?
Well, they're usually things like lotus flower. They're usually lotus flowers, and you'd have all sorts of symbols.
And is this a pea, you know, a pod?
The pea pod is there. But what a fantastic thick slab of imperial jade. Well, that really is a staggering collection that you brought in. Moving on to the question of values, it's not easy. If that wasn't damaged, it would be enormously commercial, but the damage does affect the price.
Yes, obviously.
I think that in that condition, with the crack across it, my instinct is that this is probably worth something around £4,000.
Yes.
This one here, with the wedge,
Yeah.
you know, I love the polish. It's on a 1925 bar with the diamonds on the shoulders. That one there, I think it has to be worth the same sort of money. This one here, I think, is the most beautiful carving, and it reminds me of one that I saw some years ago that was very similar, that I know in auction fetched something like £6,000 to £8,000.
Really? Gosh.
Then we move on to this one. And this one, I would want to do a little bit of work on it, just to be absolutely sure on this one. But I think this is probably £8,000 or £10,000.
I wear it quite a lot.
Well, I just think it's got so much going for it. The size,
It is
the
marvellous,
shape.
isn't it?
What a fantastic group of things. Fantastic.
Well, I
Thank
wish
you
my
very much.
grandfather could hear you say that, because he obviously adored
Well,
it.
I'm absolutely thrilled. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm thrilled.
amazed.
I'm completely thrilled. Well, an incredible collection of jewellery. My goodness, what a wonderful, wonderful, colourful jewel to see.
I went to a church antiques fair and I saw it in the cabinet, and I think it must have been my husband's birthday.
Goodness.
And so I thought, oh, I'll buy that.
That'll do nicely. Now, his name isn't Nelson, is it?
No.
But we got a good idea who it is, haven't we?
We
Did you know what it was when you bought it?
Well, I just thought it was a tie-pin.
Just that?
Yes.
And, well, it is, of course, a tie-pin, and it's a very exciting tie-pin with the most amazing context. I mean, can you guess at its context? You must have thought about it.
Oh, yes. The gentleman who did sell me it said it was connected with Nelson, but he didn't elaborate too much, and I can't really remember what he did say.
No, well, the great thing is that you really did get it, and it's terribly, terribly exciting. I think that what's important to look at, first of all, is the way in which the word Nelson is laid out in black enamel. It's champ-levé enamel. That means that the gold lettering is raised up, and then it's flooded with black enamel. And it's in a way in which mourning rings were phrased in the early 19th century. And that's a clue to the fact that this is a very personal relic of Lord Nelson. He died on the 21st of October 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar, and we know this only too well, really. And his big mistake was going on board wearing his medals, because he was a sure target for enemy fire. And of course he did receive enemy fire, and he was shot and fell, and nonetheless the battle was won. And I think it's perfectly possible that this may have been from a very close relative of his. So it's rather heart-stopping, isn't it?
It is really, yes. Considering it was one of the last things we thought about bringing.
Is that right? Well, I'm very glad that you did, really, because it's positively luminous. I mean, I think jewellery is a very funny thing. You can say that the most magnificent piece of diamond set jewellery is jewellery, and you can say that something very intimate and exciting and relatively worthless is jewellery too. This has no intrinsic value whatsoever. I mean, if it was melted down, it wouldn't be worth £15. Can you remember what you paid for it on that day?
I was trying desperately to remember, and I didn't know whether it was £8 or perhaps a little more than that.
Well, whatever it is, you overdid it, obviously.
It certainly wouldn't have been very much. No.
Well, heaven alone knows what it's really worth. I mean, there are great collectors of Nelson memorabilia. There are great collectors of Napoleon memorabilia. And I think that if this turned up at auction, it caused quite a stir. And I don't really know what to say to you. I can just tell you that this is a very small, almost radioactive piece of British history, one that's terribly, terribly exciting for me to find, and I'm going to venture £4,000 to £5,000 on it.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm just amazed.
I'm thrilled.
Just amazed.
I'm completely thrilled. I love
Yes.
it. My goodness, what a wonderful, wonderful, colourful jewel to see. What do you know about it?
Well, I know that it was most probably acquired by my grandparents. My grandfather was a well-known goldsmith and silversmith in the early part of this century. I think that's older. He obviously simply acquired it, I imagine, because he fell in love with it.
Well, I can quite see why you would. And, well, it's a stunning example of Victorian jewellery at its absolute best. And it's a type of jewellery that's often called Holbeinesque. There was a fashion throughout England in the 1860s to emulate the Elizabethan age, and so this is a Holbeinesque jewel in every sense of the word. Even the use of the peridot in the centre is typical of Renaissance jewellery. The reason that we call it a Holbein-esque is because it's loosely based on Holbein's designs, which are held in the British Museum.
Yes.
But in a more precise way, it's based on a well-known jewel which is kept at Southside House. And there is a jewel called the Gresley jewel, which must have been famous in the 19th century because parts of the decorative devices are repeated in homage to that jewel. These stylized flower heads are on the Gresley jewel.
Yes, this is enamel work, is it not?
It is.
All around
It's
the
called
edge here, yes.
Champ-levé enamel. It's again a Renaissance technique where the gold is engraved and then it's flooded with these very vivid colours. And it's something that one would expect to see on English Renaissance jewellery. At Southside House, the Gresley jewel contains miniatures by Hilliard, and it opens from the side to reveal portraits of Queen Elizabeth within. In the 19th century homage to it, we find on the back Tudor roses.
Yes, I see, yes.
In vivid red and green Champ-levé enamel. And what a wonderful thing it is. It's in pristine condition. I think what's interesting to know about Howell and James is that it was a very famous firm. What date do you assume it was?
Well, I had been told it was about 1870, and again the term Holbein-esque was applied to it, but any more than that, we knew nothing else. I don't know if it's even ever been worn. That may explain its pristine condition.
Well, I think
know.
in a way that's what would appeal certainly to anybody these days, and the value is quite dizzy, I must say. I think if it came up a specialist auction, one could expect to pay £8,000 for it, and if somebody was really greedy, perhaps £10,000 for such a dazzling example.
Gosh,
Thanks
how nice
for
to
bringing
know. It's a pleasure. Thank you for looking at it.
Amazing thing, isn't it?
Marvellous, absolutely marvellous.
How long have you had him for?
I've had him for about 20 years.
Has he always behaved quite well?
No, well, it wasn't in very good condition when I first had it, and it's been repaired and a bit refurbished. And then, at the last time I used it, I wound it up and broke the spring. So
there he
we had to have the new spring put in locally, which was very good.
Oh, well, that seems to have done it very beautifully,
Yes.
I must say. I mean, it's undoubtedly Swiss, and this rather sort of florid palette for the enamelling is a signpost to that. And the reason that it is brightly coloured is because it's to attract an Oriental audience, really. It's almost certainly made for export to the Middle, if not the Far East. And it may date from... Well, I don't think this one's quite 1820. The fashion started in about 1820.
Yes.
And it went on because it was highly successful and highly amusing. I think this one's probably getting towards the end of the 19th century. But what did you feel like when you saw that for the first time?
I was amazed. I just couldn't believe it,
Couldn't
really.
believe it was true.
Especially when all the wires come up through that tiny little pedestal
Fantastic,
to operate
isn't it?
all the beak and all the wings and everything moving. It's absolutely incredible in my view. And they tell me the bellows in there, of which there are numerous bellows, are made of mouse skin.
Well, it could be mouse skin. It's a very odd one. Certainly chicken skin is the cliche for it.
Yeah.
They are miracles, really. It's miracles, tiny miracles to keep at home in a strange way. You've got to envisage a society where there's no television, no motor cars.
How wonderful.
And no cinema. And so entertainment had to be found in very small, intimate ways.
Yes.
And nothing was more amazing, really, in the 19th century than to open this marvellous box. I suppose the swan on the lid is a bit of a sort of hint as to the contents, isn't it?
I suppose, yes.
And it's a curiously sort of childlike thing, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, it's something that would amaze a child. Do you show it to children at all?
I have not, no.
No, quite sensible. They want to sort of snatch at this bird. And
exactly.
They're hummingbirds' feathers. That's why they have such and kingfisher as well, perhaps.
Yes.
No, a marvellous, marvellous thing, giving everybody great pleasure. And look how his head turns and his beak opens. Well, he's suddenly got tired. We all have.
The chap's gone run down.
I know, we all need our batteries winding up. Well, anyway, he's not going to close quite, so we'll probably have to leave him there and wind him up again. Brilliant thing.
Yes.
Did you have him valued at all ever?
Not really, no. I've had one or two people look at it, just very interested and say what they thought, but no, not officially, let's say, no.
What did they say? Come on, they had a go, didn't they?
No, not really, no. The local chap valued it at about £4,000 a couple of years ago, but that's about all, really. Yes.
I think £4,000 is quite enough. I mean, it's a right value. I would go along with that. Sometimes they can be very much more valuable when they're gold, and sometimes they're gem set. And if they're made for the Pasha of Egypt, they might be bigger and much more exciting. This is a very, very good example of a Swiss singing bird box. What a joy, honestly, you are lucky. A pair of ruby and diamond cufflinks in the form of owls' heads. Tell me about them.
Well, I didn't know they were ruby and diamond to start with. No, I didn't.
Well, that's a very, very good start, then, isn't it?
It is rather, yes.
And we all want to know who they belong to.
They belong to my husband, and I bought them for him as a birthday present.
Well, what a brilliant thing. So gold and silver and rubies and diamonds, and I guess they date from about 1910, something like that. How much were they when you bought them?
I can't remember exactly, but I'm a generous wife, but not over the top. About £300, I think.
£300. Well, everybody would want these, I think. They look fantastic on a cuff. They're not too noisy, and they're not insignificant, and very desirable. And I'm going to value them at £1,250.
I think I deserve brownie points for years.
You do. As soon as I saw this box, which was lurking in the bottom of your handbag, it said something very specific to me.
Yes, I realised it must have done. I couldn't believe you'd spotted it so quickly.
Well, the reason is that it's made of hollywood, and it's a type of wood much favoured by a very famous Russian jeweller. Have you any idea who made this charming little brooch?
Well, when we first found it among my mother's effects, my daughter was looking at it and she said, that's Russian, I'm sure it says Fabergé. And I thought, I can't believe that, because I've no idea where it could have come from in our family.
No. And she was absolutely bang on, because in the lid satin, and satin it is a most luxurious object, this. I mean, the case is just as beautiful in a strange way as the object in it. This is pure silk at the top, and it says K. Fabergé, St. Petersburg, Moscow and Odessa. And it's an absolute bullseye. It's in perfect condition. The only thing that's a problem with it is that the pin has broken off, and that can be restored quite easily. And as you can see very plainly, it's in the form of a tiny little heart surrounded by diamonds.
Yes.
The stone in the middle, have you thought about the stone at all?
Not really. It's one I don't recognise at all. It's a faint green, so.
It is a faint green. I think it's a zircon. It's got a very high refractive index. It flashes rather wondrously, and I think it's a green zircon. But the point about this jewel really is not anything to do with intrinsic value, because I have to say, the material of it is fantastically modest. It's a green zircon, really very low value indeed. The diamonds surrounding it are very low value, and the gold is, of course, completely negligible. But it's heightened with a little flash of yellow enamel, isn't it? It's very artistic. And if you look under the yellow enamel, you'll see that you're seeing through the translucent enamel onto an engraved ground. There's a sort of flecked ground there.
So I hadn't really studied it that close.
Not even when your daughter read Fabergé? You had a closer look then?
I don't think I really believed it.
No, you didn't believe it. Well, we've got to now, I'm afraid, because it jolly well is. I mean, it's really an extraordinarily wonderful find, really. See that funny little hallmark there? It stands quite simply for Carl Fabergé. And then 56, which is the gold standard. Running down the back of it is a series of numbers, which actually you could live with it for a whole lifetime and never see. This is engraved with a little steel point, and it gives a sequence of numbers which refer to stock books. I've actually had the time to look at the London stock books and check whether this jewel is in there. Maddeningly, it isn't. If it had been in there, we would have known exactly how much was paid for it, when it was bought, and by whom it was bought. I think it's highly likely to have been sold in London. I can date it between 1903 and 1915 from the lid satin. It says Odessa here. That branch didn't open until 1903. It's rather like an archaeological site. There's lots of sort of pulls on it, tiny, tiny brooch, and you think, well, what's all the fuss about? This is, of course, a heart on a bar, and it probably meant love on some level or another. It's a most lovely, lovely find. I find it very touching, actually. This is a souvenir of Russia that's long gone by. When it was bought, it wouldn't have been a cheap object in any way. Having said that it's worth next to nothing intrinsically, Fabergé was not a shop where you expected to buy things inexpensively. It was a shop for an Edwardian elite, really, with enormous spending power. I mean, luminous amounts of money, which we can really have no contemplation of either. And this was a little toy just taken off a shelf for a very specific meaning. It would have cost perhaps something like 30 or 40 pounds. Today, I think it might be worth £8,000.
Got a weak at the knees, good gracious.
Now, what's special about this?
Well, the history to it.
Tell me what the history is.
Well, it's supposed to have belonged to Lady Jane Grey.
Well, I think what's fascinating about this piece of jewellery is that it's mounted in silver in a most particular way. In the 17th century, and in the 16th century too, they'd find these little pieces of natural history, shells and horns and hooves of antelopes and beetles and this sort of thing, and mount them up and turn them into what are called magical jewels. These are talismanic jewels, and they're worn to ward off the evil eye. Now, it is a broken one, but I can see that it's a cowrie shell.
Yeah.
And the magical significance of the cowrie shell is that it's a fertility symbol, a female fertility symbol, which brings with it good luck. And we turn it over, and it says, rather disarmingly, Jane Grey died 1554. Why on earth one should suppose that such a tiny, tiny little jewel should have anything to do with a Queen of England, albeit a queen who only reigned for 9 days, is really stretching credibility to the limits, isn't it?
Well, it is, yeah.
So I think what we can be faced with here is that we've got a late 16th, early 17th century magical jewel mounted in silver with an added punch, referring to a queen who died after reigning only 9 days.
Yeah.
She died a violent death in the Tower of London with the axe. And this, I know, and this is a reference to her.
Yeah.
She's a Protestant heroine, and that, I think, is why it's engraved on the back. And this is no way meant to deceive. It also no way is it meant for us to believe that this is a jewel directly from her.
No.
It's just a reference to an English martyr.
Yeah.
Marvellous, marvellous thing. Can you imagine how we're going to value this?
Not really, because I can't see that it has a lot of value.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. I'd say its value is absolutely next to nothing, which is absolutely unimportant to me, because I think it's loaded with interest. And let's hope it brings some good luck to both of us. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Well, it would.
Now, this looks like a little oriental slipper, doesn't it? Has it come from the Orient? Where did it come from?
Well, it came from Russia originally. My grandfather went out there with the British chess team, and when they left, they were each given one of these. I assume they're all identical, I don't know, but my grandfather had this one.
Wonderful story, isn't it? Well, Russia is certainly bang on. This is what we call a kovsh. It's a Slavonic wine-tasting vessel. But it's been rather sort of shrunk down here. Of course, it's in practical terms, it can't be used, but its very shape suggests Russia. But tell me, in your family, what's been its history?
Well, I've known it ever since I can remember, and my parents really used it as an ashtray. And I didn't realise till so many years later, and eventually got married, and my husband here polished it. He said, I'll try to clean it, and underneath suddenly appeared the silver.
Isn't that marvellous?
And it was jet black before, and I've known it for years as just being jet black, you know, throwing it around the room.
Very good, very posh to throw it around the room, very extravagant gesture in a way. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about the decoration. It's enamel, but it's in a rather sort of soft kind of palette, but the style of the object is in Russian 17th century style. And there was a huge revival in Russia around about 1900 with the Romanov tercentenary to remind themselves of their past. And all things Russian were desperately important, and so even metalwork took up this theme. And my guess is, looking underneath, yes, absolutely, that we're going to find that this is by the most distinguished goldsmith, really, of the 20th century, aren't we? I think you've got an idea who it is. Can you guess who it is?
Fabergé, I assume.
Absolutely, bang on.
It's the only name I know.
Well, it's called The Last Flowering of Court Art. So we have a truly marvellous, small, deeply attractive piece of Fabergé with a rather checkered history, and it's come through it awfully well, I think. And it's just worth looking at the bottom for a second. There's a dedication inscription, which I don't think it'll be possible to unscramble at the moment, with Fabergé's full house mark underneath the double-headed Romanov eagle, which is a pinpoint to the fact that this is a Moscow piece. And on the side here, we can see in Cyrillic the initials FR, and that stands for Fyodor Rukut, who's the actual maker of this object. And although it was retailed by the great shop of Fabergé, this is what we call a workmaster's work. Fyodor Rukut not only worked for Fabergé, he worked for other people. But happily, all the coconut shies have gone down with this, and we're in a very exciting position financially, coming from a chess prize to an ashtray, being blackened, being cleaned up by a devoted husband, being brought to the Antiques Roadshow. We reached a crescendo of valuation where I think it's perfectly safe for insurance to put this down at £5,000.
Good grief. Aren't I a clever little husband?
You are. I think you better keep him on, you know.
Oh, well, yeah, I will.
Yes, I think so. Good.
I've collected jewellery since I was about 8. I started at jumble sales, worked up to junk shops and then 1 or 2 auctions.
What really drives you to buy this?
The beauty and the colour of stones and the fact that they have to go through so much effort to get the stones where
From
they
the
are
ground.
today, yes.
Exactly. The fascination that we have for these things is because they're things of natural beauty. I mean, this is a star sapphire, isn't it? And do you know how the star is achieved in the sapphire?
I believe it's a fault in the stone.
It's a sort of a fault in the stone. It's rather like the sheen on silk, and the 2 strands of silk cross one another, and as the light falls onto it, it's separated and turned into a star. It's a sort of greyish sapphire in a way, isn't it?
Yes.
But a very, very pleasing one. And I think the thing about precious stones is, and the deep fascination for mankind, is that they're completely unchanging, aren't they?
Yes.
And we know perfectly well that it's us that are the ephemeral things. On this table, this is sand and sugar, isn't it? The sand is the simulated jewellery, and the sugar, the sweetest of all, is the diamonds and the emeralds and the sapphires and the rubies. And here are 3 delicious grains of sugar, aren't there?
Yes.
And this scintillation, this return of light, is really quite inimitable, isn't it? And one does simply recognise it. But here is something that looks for all the world, it appears to be an emerald bead necklace with an emerald-cut emerald in the centre clasp. But it isn't, is it?
No, I would think it's synthetic.
It's one made in a furnace, not by God. What do you feel about that? Do you think there is a difference between a man-made one and a natural one?
Well, there obviously is from the point of view that nature made the original, but that has its own beauty, and it's quite a nice stone to wear.
Which is your favourite?
My favourite? That one.
That one. Let's have a close look at that. The sapphire and diamond ring. The finest colour of sapphire is a cornflower blue, a cashmere sapphire with amazing velvety visual texture, which actually isn't in this one necessarily, because had it been so, it would have been worth £30,000–40,000 and more. And so a nuance of colour makes all the difference to value.
It reminds me of a summer sky.
Yes, well, I think that's completely poetic and marvellous. I don't really know how to value your collection. I think the simulated gems, which you're obviously fond of, are valued at no more than £10 or £15. And then, mixed in here, is a valuable ring, without doubt. A 3-stone diamond ring with what look to be perfectly pure and nice stones. And I suppose, you know, conservatively, that must be sort of £6,000 or £7,000 and more, mustn't it?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So a collection measured in tens of thousands of pounds and tens of pounds. And it's all jewellery, it all lives under the same name, and it gives you pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Came across them about 12 years ago in Edinburgh in a curio shop.
That's nice. And was there, did they tell you anything about its history at all?
Well, there was a label on it saying it was almost certainly.
Almost certainly. We've heard that one before. Yeah, tell me, almost certainly what?
Almost certainly made for Queen Victoria in mourning for Prince Albert, and I wanted to believe that.
Well, I think it's not terribly likely, actually, because although they're very beautiful jewels, they're not quite sort of sumptuous enough for a queen, I don't think. And it's called champ-levé enamel, which means literally a raised field, and the enamel fills the reserves where the engraving tool has gone. And it's picked out rather nicely with these crowns, and I think probably the crowns have given rise to the idea that this is a piece of royal mourning jewellery. It's rather interesting that you bought them in Scotland, because they're set with cairngorms. And, of course, Victoria and Albert had very strong associations with Scotland, and they enjoyed finding these raw rock crystals and having them polished, and it created something of a craze at that time. I think there's a very strong possibility that they are mourning jewels for Prince Albert, but they may have been made to a royal order to be given to somebody of lesser stature, and my guess is that these are probably for a particular lady at court. Prince Albert died in 1861, and the Queen was utterly grief-stricken. She wrote to her uncle, King Leopold of the Belgians, saying, "My life as a happy one is ended, the world is gone from me." And then thence afterwards, until she died in 1901, she was preoccupied with her grief and her mourning. So these would have been an appropriate thing. The date of 1861 is absolutely perfect for the style and work of these jewels. So I think in a way it's sort of credible. We just slightly missed the bullseye.
Step or two down.
Not a real big lie, it was just a small lie.
Yeah, a small lie. Well, those sometimes so very necessary in life, aren't they, really? But I'm not sure they should be brought into commerce, really. You wanted to wear them when you bought them, did you? Did you find them wearable?
Yeah, I find it, but only when I wear black. I think it only looks good on black.
I think it's absolutely splendid that you're wearing jewellery. The English are very frightened of wearing jewellery today, and you show them how it's really done. So that's
but it's a bit difficult here in Yorkshire when you live in Yorkshire.
No, I don't
and walk through the fields.
No, I think it's brilliant to see you walking through the fields. You'd rather like Mary Queen of Scots, I think, wearing that, wouldn't you? Brilliant idea. So, come on, we're all itching to know what they cost in Edinburgh 6 years ago.
Come on. He didn't tell me.
Judging by what I'm hearing,
He's going to tell you now.
I'm hesitant to say.
He's going to have to tell you now.
I paid something in the region of £3,000 for it, which probably makes you gasp.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't make me gasp. It's quite a full price, without doubt. But the thing is that it's no good sort of chasing bargains all one's life. And if you really want good things, you've got to pay for them. And there's an old saying in the antiques trade that one really only regrets one's bargains. One never regrets one's extravagances. You certainly shouldn't regret this. This is lovely, lovely jewellery. Thanks for showing it. Brilliant.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
I went to a junk shop.
Did you?
Yes, and rummaging around this box, I found, I don't know which bit, one of the pieces, and I thought, I like that. So I took it up and went to pay for it, and the bloke said, I think it was this bit, this one.
Yes.
Yeah, it was that one. And he said, that's 25 pence. So I thought, lovely. So I was going to leave, and it occurred to me, it just could be the other half. So I went back, and I found it.
You didn't?
Yes.
And what did
he said, that's 50 pence.
50 pence? Yeah. Gosh, you were going right in the fast track there, weren't you, at 50 pence? The most beautiful thing, my goodness.
I just love it.
It's wonderful. Now, it's silver. Had you guessed it was silver?
I had no idea it was silver. I couldn't believe it. When, possibly a year or two later, I realised there was a hallmark on the back.
Well, there certainly is on the back, and that's very helpful, actually, because it tells us not only the maker of this object, but also the year in which it was made, which was 1907. And it's made by Liberty & Co.
It's
Yes, it is.
It isn't a Liberty one.
It is a Liberty one.
How do you know that?
Because the hallmark is there and it tells me that it's Liberty.
Now I know it's Liberty, it'd be even more special.
Gives it the context.
It's wonderful. I just love it.
Well, isn't that marvellous? I don't know how you measure that excitement, actually. I mean, I think the point of the Antiques Roadshow is it is a sort of voyage of discovery. It's a sort of treasure hunt, perhaps an archaeological site without any digging or troweling away. But you went to the archaeological site, you found the first part, you found the second part, and you've been rewarded by a very beautiful thing. Well, value, I mean, 500, maybe 600 pounds.
I think I found it in a junk shop.
You did. Now, where is that junk shop?
I'm not going to tell you.
It's very mean.
No, I'm not going to tell you.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Look at it gleaming in the gleam of gold there.
This is actually a brooch, but it broke, so I use it as a necklace, but I will have it repaired one day.
It's worth it, I think. They're rather fascinating, aren't they? Were they your great-grandmothers?
They were my great-grandmothers, yes, and came down to me.
From Germany?
From Germany, yes.
But I think what's significant about this jewellery is that it's made of filigree and granulation.
Yeah.
Which is typical of all types of folk jewellery, from the Mediterranean up to the North Countries in Denmark and Scandinavia. The bracelet itself is a later addition because the colour of the gold is different and the phrasing of the metal.
Yeah, I wondered why.
And yet there are holes here for stitching, or at least some kind of textile. And it's my idea that this was once a hair bracelet, that there was tightly woven lock of hair supporting this bracelet.
Around it?
Around it. And this is what we very often find, that of course this is perishable and wears out,
Yeah.
and yet a gold clasp remains. And so they string it onto perfectly sensibly a later gold bracelet.
Yeah.
But hair, I'm pretty certain that it was, actually.
That's interesting.
It's an idea we're totally at odds with in the 20th century.
It
But
must have been strong hair.
well, I think it was. I think it really was. Well, good Teutonic hair, you see, that's what we want. But anyway, they're marvellous survival, but oddly enough, having opened your little Pandora's box of jewellery here, it's not the jewellery that you have in the case that's interesting me, but it's the necklace you've got round your neck. Can you take that off?
Yes.
Let's have a really good look.
I thought it belongs to what?
You thought it became part of it?
Yes.
Yes, I think it's not actually
Because
part.
it's similar. The clasp, if you look at it,
yeah.
it's similar to...
Well, it's decorated again with these tiny granules of gold, which gold is the most mysterious commodity because you can solder granules of the tiniest dust-like proportions to the surface of gold and give it this very interesting texture, and that's been going on since very ancient times. And these have erroneously been called muff chains. They're not muff chains. Because they were long, it was assumed that a muff would hang on it and put your hands through it. And it's quite nice to be able to sort of demolish that terminology once and for all, because they simply are not muff chains. They're simply there for decoration. It dates from about 1840. And it's this one that's really disproportionately valuable, because complicated gold jewellery, not easy to wear in the 20th century. And these two, fascinating as they are, they're worth low hundreds of pounds, say 350, 450 for the clasp alone, and with the bracelet, 500 pounds. But this one, put it down on your little inventory for 2,000 pounds. Surprised?
Yes.
Good. Now tell me exactly why you brought this brooch to the Antiques Roadshow.
Well, I was told it was valuable, but I wasn't just sure, and I came to get the truth.
The truth?
Wow. Truth.
Well, the truth, as you know, has to be used with great economy in life, and I'm going to tell it to you just as it is. What were you told about the stones in this brooch?
Well, I was told it was a brown diamond.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were absolutely right. It's a brown diamond and white diamonds at either end. And in a way, it's rather remarkable for that. We don't see coloured diamonds very often in life. To be perfectly honest, we don't see rather large diamonds in life very often, do we? Tell me, whose was it?
It was an aunt of mine, and she was the same name as myself, so I eared it.
Well, that's wonderful, isn't it? I'm just lucky you did have the same name, actually. We might have bypassed you. And it's not something one would want to bypass in life, because it's a very, very glamorous object indeed. I think it's worth saying about diamonds is that the white diamonds is what people really want. Blue white diamonds even better. Then, when they look inside, they want to see it absolutely flawless in the inner depths of the stone, and they'll use a diamond glass to determine that, using quite a high magnification to look into the inner recesses of the stone. Then, of course, they look for sheer size in diamonds, and this is a very respectable size. It's probably about 2 carats, something of that sort. And it's a curiosity. Have you ever seen a brown diamond before?
No, and my aunt wore it, and she said it wasn't a diamond.
Well,
She said, that's not a diamond.
Well, I'm absolutely confident that it is, and it's a very exciting thing for me to see, actually. It is, of course, the hardest material known to man. It scratches every other material in the planet, and there's a guide to hardness called Mohs Guide of Hardness, where every stone is used to scratch another stone. The diamond is at the top of that, resplendent at the top. Whatever you do to it, you cannot scratch it. And then, second on Mohs scale is the sapphire. And the diamond is 7 times harder than the second layer down. But what we can say is that this is a remarkable thing to find today. And to tell you also that the cutting of the diamond is a 19th century, late 19th, perhaps early 20th century cut, and it's been put into a brooch rather later on. So it lived in another jewel before, as indeed its little partners at the end did. And it's a shawl pin for a very elegant lady in about 1900. So a remarkable object in every sense of the word. So we've got to get down to the nitty-gritty hardness of diamonds and get down to hard facts about finance. Go home, ring up the insurance company and say you want to cover it for £2,500.
Right. That's
Surprise?
Super. That's super.
Good. Well, this is a most wonderful Art Deco brooch. Tell me who it was made for.
Well, I think it's my mother's. I think it was a 21st birthday present for her in 1938.
Oh, that's interesting. I've got a funny feeling it was made a little earlier than that, you know. There's various aspects of the design that point to it being just a tiny bit earlier than that, maybe 10 or 15 years. It seems to me a positive distillation of the Art Deco period, doesn't it? What parts of it did you think looked Art Deco particularly?
Well, the oblong and the big diamond in the centre.
Right. And funny enough, it's the sun rays that appear left and right that sort of interested me as a sort of Art Deco focus. And these strange conventionalized bunches of grapes. This is a sort of, really a landscape, isn't it, in diamonds. And it's an interesting one too, because it's very spirited. It's a really great Art Deco jewel, but strangely it's English. And actually we associate the very best Art Deco jewels with France. And so it's interesting for that too. I mean, I must say I do love it. My goodness, it's very enviable because it's exactly the right scale for everybody today. I think there's lots of people who wouldn't mind wearing that on a black suit, and because it's so colourless too, it's exactly what people want. So all of those things do add up to, you know, something really very desirable indeed, and with desirability comes value, doesn't it?
Yes.
Have you had any thoughts about it being what its value is? Obviously it's
I know its probate value of 1997, and that's all. It was 1,200 then.
Yes. Well, it does seem to me very low, to be frank. I think that this is a little work of art. It's the finest craftsmanship. It's also very, very beautiful diamonds. So I'm going to go a bit mad, I'm afraid. Are you ready?
Yes.
I'm going to tell you that it's worth £8,500.
Oh my word!
It's lovely. Crazy about it.
Yes, yes.
Now, would you be upset if I told you that this was a souvenir? Would that?
It might well be. I don't know where it came from. It was just sitting in the bank, really. I don't know where it came from at all.
How amazing. Well, originally it came from Rome, and it's the sort of object that would have been brought back by a first-class grand tourist visiting Rome. And it's perfectly obvious that it's a Roman ruin. I mean, there's no, at least an Italian ruin, but what's more significant and points us towards the fact that this is a very grand souvenir is that it's laid out in micro-mosaic. Have you thought about this technique at all?
No, I know nothing about it.
No. Well, if it's made up of tiny, tiny pieces of glass and some perhaps hard stones too, that are laid into a background minutely and very accurately, and it's a sort of miracle of human craftsmanship.
It's tiny, little bits.
And it refers back to the mosaics of ancient Rome, the Byzantine mosaics, the Roman mosaics, that such a man would go to visit. And so he might well have brought this back to a member of his family who had not had the pleasure of visiting Rome with him. But this is quite a lavish thing. There's quite a lot of plate powder in the surface of it, which prevents us from understanding immediately that this is a rather ravishing gold box. Solid gold. It's marvellous.
Is it really? I didn't know it was gold.
Yes, absolutely. It's actually a very matte gold, and gold is very malleable material. You can push it around and engrave it and texture it. And this is exactly what's happened here. The two marvellous sort of neoclassical griffins, rather fierce-looking chaps with beards, and it's lined with a very smart band of enamel, which is an echo of the band of enamel on the front. What about date? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
I don't know. It was just in. My mother died a few years ago, and it was just in a box in the bank. You know, so I know really nothing about it. What would she have put in it?
It's a snuff box, notionally.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Because it's tiny, isn't it? I mean, it wouldn't fit a cigarette or anything.
No, absolutely not. No, snuff it is, and this is a very, very eloquent and beautiful example from about 1820. Now, having said that it was almost certainly bought in Rome, the great surprise is that it's not made in Rome, it's Swiss.
Oh, really?
Yes. And all they've done is incorporate a mosaic, which does come from Rome.
Yes.
It's hugely enviable. I think everybody behind us love to sort of snatch this out of our hands, wouldn't they, and run away with it. I would. And because of that, it's really quite a valuable object. And so, goodness, what shall we say? £15,000.
Gracious. Whoa. I think you'd better go back in the bank.
So, perhaps I'll go with it. Brilliant. Absolutely marvellous. Thank you so much. Fabulous. It's actually made in England in 1840. This derives from a design conceived by Prince Albert. He asked for 12 bridesmaids' brooches to be made out of these materials for the Queen to hand out immediately after the wedding ceremony. And it's absolutely loaded with amatory significance. This is a hand on which a lovebird has alighted. It's a lovebird made of turquoise, and in the language of the lapidary, the turquoise stands for true love. it's an echo of the colour of the forget-me-not flower, and it means forget-me-not too. But also you can see lurking here is a tiny little ruby eye for the lovebird. And again, in the language of the lapidary, this stands for passion. So we've got passionate true love. And also we want that forever, dream on, as they say. But it's true in that the fingernails of the hand are actually diamonds, and diamonds are forever. So this is forever, passionate, true love in a tiny jewel like this. What does it mean to you?
Well, I just love it.
You wear it?
And I do wear it, yes.
Had you got a clue about its meaning, its hidden meaning?
Well, no, I hadn't really.
No, well, in a way, that's good fun, because I think the point about jewellery is that it does act on us kind of subliminally. There's something very deep-seated in us, this understanding, and we don't have to think about it very carefully and hard. But I must say it's hugely animated. I mean, it really is very sculptural, and that's quite rare in jewellery. Usually it's very sort of two-dimensional, and it is the liveliest composition I've seen of this type of jewellery. Intrinsic value is nothing, really, absolutely nothing. I mean, really no more than sort of 80 to 100 pounds in the value of the stones, but in the value of the composition, 800 pounds.
Goodness, I'll still wear it.
Good, that's what it's for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, this is a tiny, tiny little ring, isn't it? What prompted you to bring it to us today?
Well, because I believe it's valuable.
Did you? Why?
Yeah.
What made you
well,
think that?
It says Lalique inside.
Well, it does, doesn't it?
Yes.
And tell me what you know about Lalique.
Well, I know they did...
it's French.
French, yes. And they do a lot of...
jewellery,
pottery as well.
Yes, glass later on, yeah.
Well, that's where we realised that it could be valuable. Yes.
Well, I mean, it's not only a rare thing, but it's a very beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yes,
and tell me, who gave it to you?
Old gentleman who lived next door. We made a lot of
It was on his own, left on his own, and we looked after him and so on. He was 94 years old.
And did he know about whatever?
I don't really know.
It was Lalique until after he died.
I don't think he realised the value of it.
No, but what has to be said is that this is a complete little masterpiece of goldsmith's work. And it has to be said, too, that it's made by one of the towering geniuses of the Art Nouveau movement, René Lalique. And he just happens to be a genius who chose to work in jewellery and then moved on into glass. And this is a tiny expression of his work, but it's all there. Now, tell me, what do you think about the screen material?
I don't know. Is it enamel?
It is enamel. Yeah. It's a very particular sort of enamel, which we call plique à jour enamel, which means applied to the day, which is another way of saying that this is an enamel without a background. And the point about Lalique is that he was returning to nature. His inspiration comes from plant life and from animal life.
Yeah.
And in order to achieve that, he used what was actually a Japanese technique in suggesting the veins in leaves and the veins in the wings of buzzing insects with pierced gold, and then he'd hold the enamel in suspension like a bubble, and it gives a little bit of naturalism, or more than a little bit of naturalism. Now, the reason it's tiny, of course, is that it's a ring, so this is not marks against it in any way at all, actually, that it is a tiny, tiny little work of art. People collect these things, and if it turned up in a sale, two collectors wanting it very badly, I think maybe 5,000, maybe 6,000 wouldn't be completely mad. Well, an incredible collection of jewellery. And when did you start collecting all of these?
Oh, about 35 years ago.
35. And how many have you got altogether?
700.
700. And they're all brooches?
700 brooches.
I've
got bracelets.
And where do you wear any of them?
Oh, yes, some of them.
Which do you like to wear?
I like that one there.
That one, right.
And that's a favourite of mine there.
Yeah, brilliant.
Where's the other one?
And what about these? What are those? Tell us about those.
Those are Mother's Day presents off my children.
Oh, are they? From Mother?
Yes,
they're big, sort of scratchy, aren't they? Do you know what they are?
Yes,
what are they?
Rabbit's claws?
No, they're grouse's claws, and they're to do with the shoot. The feet of the grouse that have been shot were then taken to the jeweller and mounted up.
So it's real?
Oh, definitely it's real. Very scratchy, aren't they? And, ooh,
Not
yes.
as scratchy as these.
No, those are quite scratchy too, aren't they? Boy, oh boy. And do you wear those all the time? It's a bit like it's like armour, isn't it?
Yeah,
You don't-
I wear them all the time.
And they're a bit sort of Chinese in a way, aren't they? They look
Quite
like those
heavy.
sort of fingernail guards of Chinese
Yeah.
emperors and things. Do they make you
Got a
feel
bit
like an
more
empress or
posher.
not?
No.
They don't.
No, I just feel different.
What's the most different one here? Come on. Tell me about that one. Where did you
I
find
got
that?
that off the internet. I go through the auction rooms.
Did you?
And I put a bid in for about £2 and I won it.
Isn't it wonderful?
So that was a good buy.
And I like it because it's a glass of champagne with bubbles coming out of it, which is, you know, part of being different again, isn't it? The good party jewel. But it also makes a reference to jewellery that was going on at the time. This is a jewel that looks to me as if it might have been made in the 30s or 40s. And it's simulating baguette diamonds and brilliant diamonds. And the original could have been made by, well, indeed, it would have been by Cartier or Boucheron or something like that. And had it been set with diamonds and been as imaginative as that, instead of being £2, it might have been £20,000.
Oh my God! I'll have to find a real one. Then,
Wouldn't that be good? That'd be very good. Well, I think you will in the end because you're so determined, aren't
Well,
you?
I've got so many, and that one, my daughter bought me that one, and I really like that one because. You know, I think the ones the kids buy you are
more touching, aren't they?
They're more priceless,
no, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's brilliant colours. It's like a sort of pomegranate, isn't it? Fab.
I nearly wore all 700 on this.
All 700? You would have been clunking
I tried
away like
getting them
mad,
on,
wouldn't
yes.
you?
They came to me through my parents, who were in Iran in the early 1930s, and the White Russians brought this stuff with them as their only means of currency. They didn't have anything else. They were refugees. And that's how my parents came by them.
Well, they went to the right place with it because the Iranians are very attracted to this Clausen enamel, Russian Clausen enamel, because it's very brightly coloured, and I think they saw a reference to their own tradition of enamelling. They're in revival of 17th century enamel work. This one most particularly is not only in revival of 17th century enamel, but it's a 17th century shape called a kof, which is a Russian wine-tasting vessel. It's a Slavonic object. It's rather like having a sort of three-dimensional Union Jack, if you like. They are spectacularly beautiful examples. Must have been swiped off sideboards from very noble houses just to flee Russia with something.
Exactly.
This one would appeal to collectors enormously, actually, because it's a cigarette lighter, and I think one possibly doesn't really think of these being possibly 20th century objects, really made possibly in 1910, 1915. And a match case probably in advance of the lighter. It would hold matches, napkin rings, salts, and a spoon. One of the greatest masters of Russian Clausen enamelling was a man called Semenov. And I think from the quality of this work that we're going to find that this is by him, and indeed it is. And his business was inherited by his daughter, Maria Semenova. They're very valuable, actually. Have you thought about their value at all?
I don't know what they're worth at this point in time, no.
Quite nice values, really. Maybe 800 for the lighter. Everybody would be thrilled to find that. Another 800 for the kofsh. Let's say 3,500 for the whole group.
Really? As much as that? Fantastic.
My wife had it for, I don't know, 5-6 years. It's probably come down through the family. She was quite happily wearing it as a bit of costume jewellery.
Bit of costume jewellery?
Yeah.
And what did she wear it on?
Denim jackets.
Denim jackets.
Anything that she thought, nice sparkly thing. And then we took it to a jeweller's in Chancery Lane to get the clasp sort of repaired a little bit. And he turned around and said, you do realise it's the real thing?
The real thing.
And so she's not worn it since, more's the pity.
Diamonds and denim.
Yes, exactly.
She really thought a bit about the design.
I did notice that the two ends unscrewed, but that was...
Well, they unscrew because there was probably not only this brooch, but a cascade of them running the front of a lady's fiercely corseted dress in about 1900. So you think your wife had problems. Think of Princess Yusupova walking around with this. Not bad, is it?
No, not bad at all.
Not bad. Now, I say Princess Yusupova because I can tell that this is a Russian brooch by the safety clasp. There's a strange little sort of twist like a question mark at the end, which is a brilliant device because it stops the owner pricking her finger, or more accurately, her lady's maid pricking her finger, because you've never put this sort of thing on yourself in pre-revolutionary Russia. What we call a stomacher because it runs along the front of the stomach of such a lady. I don't think how it could have been more beautiful. Why? What's the look? And just underneath here, there's a break in the design, which I think is where the second and third, and I don't know how many more brooches went down to meet it. A tiny little groove here, and also observe the beauty of this gallery here, the Pierce gallery, and the fact that the back of the brooch is made of gold, and yet the front is of platinum to give the whiteness of the effect. I think it's probably quite a late brooch. It's 20th century. The Russians, it's curiously sort of feudal life they were living there, and in the early 20th century, things couldn't be more sumptuous and more bejewelled and more exotic, really. So this is a fantastic context, really, isn't it? I'm just going to look a little bit for hallmarks. Russian hallmarks almost always appear on the clasp of the jewel and along the pin, which is strange, and yet there are more here. And it's jolly good that I did check that, actually, because there are the initials of the maker there, Theodore Laurier, who is a very well-known Art Nouveau jeweller, making things in the manner of Lalique, serpents and butterflies and that sort of thing. So this is a slightly conventional one for him, but a very beautiful one. Now, what did the jewellers have to say about it? They must have admired it very much, I think, didn't they?
Well, they did, yes. They said it was a lovely piece, and even turned around and said, "I'll give you 5,000 scrap for it." I said, "No."
5,000 scrap?
I said, "No,
Wow.
I don't think so."
No, well, I think scrapping it's not the right word.
Exactly.
I think we've gone beyond scrapping.
No, it's too beautiful for someone to break down.
Fabulous context. Well, you know, if he's going to offer you £5,000 scrap for it, double it up for insurance. £10,000 for insurance, yeah.
Dear me.
Well, they were given to my great-grandfather, who was chef to Edward VII and Queen Victoria at the end of her reign, by the crowned heads of Europe, and some of these are the Russian pieces.
Amazing. Now, do you think that they were objects given almost as a sort of thank you to this?
That's right. Yes.
And is this all the things that you have? Are there any more?
No, I have some other pieces which come from Manuel of Portugal, Kaiser Bill.
All the visitors to Sandringham, all the visitors to Buckingham Palace, all the cousins of the British royal family that are descended from Queen Victoria.
That's right,
in a sense, she's sort of fountainhead of this sort of society, European royal society. Let's have a look at those. These are Russian ones, and a pair of gold cufflinks set with rubies and diamonds, alternating rubies and diamonds, in a sort of nugget effect.
Nugget, that's what I've always been told, yes, gold nuggets.
And there's a most marvellous word in Russia used to describe this, which is called samorodok, which means a nugget. And it's a very, very Russian technique, much favoured by Fabergé. And in fact, these are not by Fabergé, and the lid satin rather conveniently tells us that they're made by somebody called Ivanov, working in St. Petersburg. And it's certain that they are a gift from the member of the Imperial family, because the Imperial family's cipher appears above.
Yes.
And do you know exactly who gave those?
I think it was Tsar Nicholas.
He certainly came to London, and he certainly went to Sandringham, and there were many opportunities in which he could have offered those. Tell me about what you know about him as a chef. Why was he so favoured, do you think?
Well, he was a Frenchman to start with, and I understand he'd been chef to people like the Rothschilds and had been to Saltram in Devon. And Edward VII heard of him and wanted him to be his chef, and I think he may have poached him.
What did he look like? Do we know what he looked like?
Yes, I have a picture here.
Oh, isn't it marvellous? And with his
of
family?
His family, with mother, with his wife, and the two daughters, my grandmother and my aunt.
Oh, that's very touching, isn't it? My goodness. Yes, he looks quite sort of...
avuncular.
Well, doesn't he? He's a brilliant chap, I must say.
Yes.
And so these were his things. Well, let's just run through them a little bit further. Have you thought about these ones here?
Well, I have been told that they were cufflinks, but they have little rings on, as you can see just there. And I really don't know. I imagine because they were given to my great-grandfather, they must have been cufflinks, I feel, and because he only had daughters, possibly the daughters had them made into brooches or pendants.
I think what has happened, and rather sadly, is that when these adaptations have been made to turn them into brooches, that the marks had been lost. But these are very characteristic of Fabergé's work. We call this guilloché enamel, and it's an engine-turned gold mount that's flooded with translucent pink enamel. And then the imperial eagle is applied as a gold cipher over and above that. In every way, they're positively reek of Fabergé. But in stamp collecting terms, I can't be absolutely certain. But I can be certain about this one. And does the family history say that that was an imperial gift?
They do. They do say, the family told me that that was definitely given by Tsar Nicholas.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that at all, and there's absolutely no doubt at all that this is a full-blown Fabergé brooch.
It is.
Oh, wonderful.
It's signed.
Because I wondered, and I sort of half hoped it would be, and that's marvellous. Oh,
well, it's a most distinguished thing. Again, the use of the guilloche enamel,
Yes.
yellow enamel in this case, and 2 colours of gold,
Yes.
little laurel wreaths, and tied with a diamond bow, emblematic of peace, and the Romanov crown set with diamonds and circled with pearls. And we know it's Fabergé because on the back here, there's the workmaster's initials for August Holming, who was not necessarily a specialist jeweller, but a worker in all manner of enamel work. So goodness me, and there's more at home. There's more souvenirs.
Yes, well, a few more. Yes, a few more.
Now, as for value, the cufflinks are impressive. They're very Russian technique in the manner of Fabergé, but a rose by any other name smells as sweet, but it certainly isn't as valuable.
No.
And I think with an imperial provenance, nonetheless, they are very desirable, very wearable. And a very precise provenance, so I suppose something like £7,000 or £8,000 for the cufflinks.
Really? My goodness gracious me.
Nothing to do with intrinsic value, nothing at all. These, I believe them to be Fabergé from a technical basis, really, and as souvenirs of Nicholas II, which is absolutely certain. I think we can go a bit mad again. £8,000 to £10,000 for those. You feeling calm? It's very, very good, isn't it? Making me nervous.
These are things that I don't really want to sell, you see.
No.
I want to keep, and yes, because they're family pieces.
Well, I think in a way they should be kept together as a collection.
Should they? That's what I wanted to ask you.
Context everything here and provenance, actually. And what about this one? Any ideas for that one?
Well, if these are that price, that must be £10,000.
Well, it is £10,000, and it's more than £10,000.
Is it?
Yep. It's £15,000.
My dear chap, God.
It's wonderful.
That's amazing. I never realised it would be as much as that, I must confess.
No. I'm going to say this is a genuine Waterhouse. It's very difficult to price something like this. It's one of the great 20th century artists. I think a fair value is... This wood has been cut with one of those really rough two-man saws, and this panelling has stayed together for 300 years. Yes. If a picture's on panel, it makes an enormous difference. You can almost date the picture from the back. And this is a wonderful panel. If every picture tells a tale, please tell me.
Well, some years ago, my father and I, we were refurbishing a room in our Tudor house, and there was a Victorian fireplace which we took out, which revealed a Tudor fireplace. And above that was layers and layers of wallpaper. So we decided to start scraping it off, and...
So this was, the wallpaper was stuck to this?
Yes.
It's obviously a smart 17th century house, and it's wonderful. I mean, the red brick glows. These houses did glow then. It's a fair bet to assume that this is a real house, it's not a fantasy house. And this, I'm sure, is by an English painter, not a Dutch painter. Say about 1700, 1710, 1720. The panelling tells us that, the whole way it's put together. We can trace the history of this sort of painting very easily. And the reason, as you can see, the reason I wanted to show the back of the panelling is there's not a split, barely a split on this panel. And the reason is this is seasoned wood, 20-year-old wood, so it doesn't move. Good lesson for builders today. Wonderful.
Well, it's just one that, to me and my mother, we think that this is out of position compared with the landscape, which looks quite normal. And it seems to me as though that they've put the landscape in, and then as an afterthought, they've put the building.
Well, had you thought that really the landscape that we know today in England is basically an invention of the 18th century? This artist is very happy putting in these abstract shapes. I mean, this is a wonderful abstract painting as well. And this formality of gardens is something that comes from Europe, imposing an architectural statement on the landscape. In fact, in Britain now, because of Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton, we do exactly the opposite. We garden to the landscape. We like to garden as though it's natural. But there's another thing, which is very interesting. You said this picture was over the mantelpiece.
That's right.
One of the interesting things about the fashion of having your house painted was that they replaced portraits. So So it was actually exactly where it should have been for the fashion of the day. I think it's wonderful.
Yes.
And I think it's very interesting. I mean, I've never seen such a complete British painting of this period in a way. It's very difficult to price something like this, but I think at least 10 to 15,000. It's a wonderful object.
Oh, thanks so much.
Oh dear, speechless. I'm speechless.
Hedley is a local artist of quite some repute, and I'm not surprised to see it here, but I am delighted to see such a magnificent work. Tell me about your connection with this picture.
Well, I'm Ralph Hedley's great-grandson. I didn't inherit it, I bought it for about £50 in 1971.
Of course, he is well known for his working class
Yes.
subjects, as it were.
Yes.
And here is a scene that you would have seen all over Britain.
Yes.
Because they made bricks on the spot in all sorts of places. But I can't think of many paintings of brickmaking.
Yes.
Do you know about brickmaking?
Well, I do, because I have this painting. It tells me about brickmaking.
Well, it does really, doesn't it?
Yes, yes.
And I'll tell you why I like this picture immensely. Because the composition tells the story.
Yes.
It's all about composition. Where do you start? In a way, well, of course, you start in most pictures in the foreground. And where does it lead your eye? It leads your eye down here to this anonymous heap. What is that heap? Of course, that is the clay. And that clay has actually been sitting there probably for a year. And then it leads you back down the wheelbarrow track. And where does the clay go? It goes into this machine. So as you say, I've done a quick course in brickmaking as well with this picture. And then they fill out the bricks, and it seems to me that they squeeze out the water and it comes down this channel. And then she's placing the bricks here. That's what good composition about. It leads your eye around the picture. And there is no question that this composition is a very dynamic composition. Not just because your eye is led around the picture, but when you come to this figure, in the foreground, the main figure of the girl placing the bricks from the molds just to dry out on the earth, she is echoed by the man with the wheelbarrow. So then you see the dynamics of the two working people, each with a different task. Now, the interesting thing is, was that in the family? This is the sketch for the painting?
No, a London gallery inquired about this picture of the Laying Art Gallery in Newcastle.
Right.
And they
led directly to
me, and I couldn't refuse to buy it.
No. Well, I think it's very interesting because here is the artist working out his thoughts in a sketch.
Yes.
And it doesn't really work. And we can see here that instead of having a dynamic here, it's rather flat and one-planed. And the wall doesn't lead to the clay, and he hasn't got it right. He's working out his thoughts. It's very interesting. You should bring the two, because this is what art is all about. Value. What did you say it cost you? I can't remember.
£50.
£50, 1971.
1971, yeah.
Not bad. I think a fair value is £35,000, £40,000.
That would.
It has tremendous charisma. It is the most compulsive object in my house.
Yes.
And it's in my living room, and people comment on it. It has a lot of humour, a lot of compassion. It is very much of its period, when women became came out into the world and had occupations. It was the beginning, wasn't it?
Yes.
Nursing and teaching. And she was obviously a lady of some quality, and I think had quite a comfortable lifestyle.
Have you ever done any research on this with the family or anything like that?
Yes, in 1980 there was an exhibition of Clausen work at the Royal Academy.
Yes.
And I did write to the organisers, and they very kindly passed on a photograph to the Clausen family.
Yes.
But the Clausen family weren't able to find any records in his logbooks or with his family.
And they didn't, did they make any comment on whether they didn't recognise the girl or anything?
No, there was no recognition of the girl.
Okay, because I know the reason for asking this, first of all, I suppose I ought to talk a little about George Clausen, who was one of the most beautiful artists in Britain, in the post-impressionist plein air style, the style that came out of France.
Yes.
But also he was a very good portrait painter.
Right.
But His portraits were more private than public, I think. And and then we come to the First World War. This is 1917. He's 66 years old.
Yes.
No chicken.
Yes.
But like everybody else, he was deeply touched by the war. And he was touched by the war most personally because his daughter's fiancé was killed, I'm not sure, 1915-16.
Right.
And he painted that very moving picture in the War Museum, which I think is called, do you remember what it's called? Youth Sorrows?
Yes.
Of the nude girl crouched
in front of
the cross.
Yes.
And I think just like Youth Sorrows is an allegory of the hell of war, I think perhaps this is also another allegory, but approached from a different direction. For me, the most compelling thing about this picture that takes us into those hellish years is her eyes. These eyes have had the cream of youth dying in her arms. And these eyes reflect something within her which she will live with for the rest of her life, as most people who survived the First World War did.
Yes.
And I think that it's a very, very beautiful, poignant picture from that point of view.
Yes.
It's not going to be, I mean, a George Clausen could make £500,000. A wonderful, bright, popular
the large agricultural paintings. Yes.
Something,
yes.
you know, or something like that. It could make a lot of money. We're not talking about this. We're talking about our history.
Yes.
I would value this at £20,000 to £30,000, that sort of level.
Yes.
And I think it's a wonderful treasure.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Which is very special.
The rip has always been there.
Is it? Where's it been then, this much-loved picture?
I think it was in an old barn or a farm building for about 30 years. And then my father, he bought it about 20 years ago. I think it was a house sale for a few pounds. It wasn't expensive.
What did he think about it?
He liked it, but we didn't know how to get it restored.
Right.
So it just got left. I've always assumed it was Waterhouse.
Do you know about Waterhouse?
I've seen an Antiques Roadshow before, and there was a painting on there by the same artist, and that's why I bought this today.
Right, but this is so untypical, this picture, that first of all we say, well, it's not really a Waterhouse. But it is signed JWW down here. And if I think about Waterhouse when he started painting, he was sort of experimenting. He wasn't really very well trained when he started painting. He painted little interiors and this sort of thing. And I personally think this is by Waterhouse, John William Waterhouse, because I think it's the young man coming into being a better painter, and before he's really decided the subjects he really wants to do, which is his affinity to the pure Raphaelites and pretty girls. So, on balance, I'm going to say this is a genuine Waterhouse. And then we have to say, well, since you've looked after it so beautifully...
No, I'm not to blame for it.
Since you looked after it so beautifully, what's it worth? It's in rotten condition, but this can be put right, although I think that will be difficult to clean. This area I'm not worried about, but the dirt is quite ingrained into that impasto there. I think between £5,000 and £10,000, £5,000 or £6,000.
Shock. I am shocked. I am. I thought about £500. I was so worried about the rip.
Well, it's pretty nasty. That is horrid, you know, and that's needs a lot of work doing, and so does this. But I didn't see why, you know, finished and all done up, somebody might ask £20,000 for it or something.
So it's worth for me to take it and have it restored.
I think so, yes. Born in Kettering, studies in Glasgow, goes to France, studies the Barbican artists, Corot and all those sort of people, travels everywhere, Morocco, Japan, becomes very famous, highly sought after. And, I mean, tell me what you think about this painting.
Without seeming sophisticated myself, I like the freehand style, and I like the way that you can look at the picture in a general way, as opposed to in a relaxed way, as opposed to having to study the picture. I like the picture to speak to me,
right,
and absorb the colours and the sort of free flow of the painting.
Because, you know, This sort of painting is really out of fashion today because it speaks to you, but it sort of doesn't say a lot, does it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's hard to think why East can paint beautiful things. I mean, these little views of Japan are absolutely exquisite. And some of his things, but generally when he's painting this size, I find them, and I don't think I'm very different from the general public today, a bit boring.
Yeah, a bit too big.
Well, it's just, there's not much going on, and I don't think this is his best work either, this period. I mean, the way he melts all this in is fine, but he hasn't done terribly well here.
No.
It's not signed, but, I mean, you are quite sure it's an East.
I'm confident that it's an East.
I'm confident it's an East too, so we'll agree on that.
But not one of his better ones.
No. Now, tell me about this. Tell me what you think about this.
I think this is far more vibrant and more interesting. It's small enough to hang in the living room, and it may have been a little bit nicer if the lady was facing us as opposed to away. But generally, I find it's... isn't it? I don't know.
I think it's a good old gardener.
Is it?
Of the younger male variety myself, but...
Well, if these are nettles, he's got his work cut out.
I think it's a much better picture than that. It's got a better composition, it's more vibrant, and actually it's a different mentality. This is based on sort of Barbizon principles, which are going to the landscape in a certain way and going to the woods and painting quite dense subjects. This is based on Impressionist principles. Sisley and Pissarro going to common a garden, domestic subjects and landscapes and making them live in a way. And here is a garden, and it's the garden of a reasonable house. Here is the garden boy. It's just a bit overgrown here, but Marguerite's and very French. So maybe it's not any feeling in France, maybe this is in France.
Oh, really?
But on the other hand, that's rather an English roof, I think.
Yeah.
I think we're back to Kettering.
All right, good. Good.
Right. A painting like this, which would have probably fetched a relatively large amount during his lifetime, is relatively small on today's market. So I would say £1,500, £2,000, something like that.
That's not too bad then.
This one, I think, really is a picture that would be desired. It's got a focal point. I can see sort of £6,000 to £8,000.
You're kidding me.
Well, why not?
That is fantastic. That is really good.
Well, this is a real artist group of pictures, and there's obviously a good reason for that.
Yes, well, I'm a painter myself, and some people might look at something like that and think, just a scrappy drawing. But
no, but I mean, as an artist, presumably, you're more interested in personal things.
Yes, I am. You know, I mean, I like the Sickert, you know, because it's, you know, a very personal thing. It's almost as he's been sat at his chair and just drawn that.
Well, absolutely.
And also, it's not about technical brilliance. It's about character, and I think that, you know, that drawing has great character.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why. And I think actually everything you have here has character. And then the Augustus John.
Yeah, I mean, Augustus John's not one of my favourite artists, but I like that drawing because it's so loose and airy. It's almost like a Matisse drawing. You know?
Well, I think he was just indisciplined. You know, at his best, he's wonderful. But he produced all this indisciplined stuff because he didn't know when to stop, really.
Yeah.
In anything.
Well, that's a good thing, I think, for an artist.
What about Patrick Heyman?
Well, I bought that while I was at art college, and I didn't know anything about him. I bought it from a gallery for next to nothing.
But why did you buy it? That's what I want.
Because I liked the looseness of it. I love the blue.
Yeah.
The skin tones with the blue, I think, are really nice. It really warmed it up for something that's quite cold.
And Patrick Heyman was a very private artist. He was he was a visionary, and he dug deep into himself, got rid of all the sophistication, became a deliberate, naive painter, but in a very genuine way. Very interesting. And finally, I don't know this artist at all.
Alan Walton.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't buy that. I inherited that piece. Yeah. I don't know that much about him either, to be honest, but I just like the painting.
It's a stunning painting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think we can begin to put it together. In other words, it's just before the First World War. It's on leave, tired and emotional. But it's immensely powerful.
I mean, even
Wonderful.
though the legs here are very awkward, the hands just, kind of scrapped in.
Yeah,
It works beautifully. You don't question the fact that, the leg would have to be broken to be in that shape. You just don't question it because the thing as a whole works.
Absolutely. Terrific impact. Right, we've got to do prices now.
Right.
Thing that interests me least, but we'll do the prices.
Right.
Sicket drawing. Very beautiful. I think £5,000 to £8,000, maybe a bit more.
Good gosh.
Good drawing. Augustus John suffers from his overproduction, as it were.
Yeah.
I think £1,000, £1,500 for that.
Yeah.
Patrick Heyman, being such a private artist, not discovered by the general public. You could buy a great painting by him like this for around £1,000, £1,500, something like that. And finally, Alan Walton, the Alan Walton. Well, I don't know whether he has any value on the market as such. In other words, there's any record of value on that. I simply don't know. But that's a hell of a picture. I must say at least £10,000 to £15,000.
I'm very surprised.
Well, it's a cracking picture.
Yes, I know a little bit because I managed to find a book about him. I know he was in Leeds.
John Atkinson Grimshaw.
That's right.
Yes.
And that he became famous for the moonlit scenes that he painted.
Yes.
Which this is a fairly minor one, I think. But it's always intrigued me. It's been in our family for almost exactly 100 years.
Well, I mean, Grimshaw is a very interesting artist. When he started painting in the 1860s, he painted very, very precisely. And in fact, he was also a photographer. So there is a photographic base to a great number of Grimshaw's paintings. Grimshaw is a northern artist, and therefore, because he never moves to London, he has to make success in the north, which is a rare thing in a way. Most people move to London to make that success or move to a bigger town. But when he became successful, like a lot of artists, he became popular, he had to produce more paintings. And painstaking techniques do not allow you to mass produce. So he started using more photographic bases and started using more workers. Here you see the typical Grimshaw trees. And you see quite hard work in here, the way these branches are done. You can see how cleverly this is stippled in. It's actually painted rather fast. Basically, Grimshaw and his team have learnt the tricks. That they've learnt the tricks how to paint the foreground and the background, how to paint the muddy road with the minimum of effort. I mean, the maximum technique, but the minimum of effort. And I think this is very apparent in this picture because it seems to me that this is one of those Grimshaws which has at least two different hands in. And shows its strengths and its weaknesses for that. That its strengths are here, very beautiful. The foreground is a bit automatic. If this was an 1870s picture, you would really feel this foreground. You'd really feel those ruts in the mud. And then, it seems to me that this is a bit weak. I don't know how you feel about it.
I have often felt the horses were weak.
Yes, it just doesn't quite hold together. This heavy cart laden with trees is not sinking into the mud, and the horses, instead of straining to get round the corner and slightly go down, are sort of as though they're on a Sunday stroll. And so, was there a problem up here with the moon?
Well, that's part of the family story. Apparently during the war years, there was a cleaning lady helping in the house, and she assumed that the moon was a spot of something that had fallen on the picture, and she tried to clean the moon off.
Do you have a lot of pigeons in your house?
Not as far as I know.
As soon as you explain it, then we can see why the moon doesn't balance with the rest of the picture, which it would have done. And she's not only had a good scrub here, she's actually removed, I would suggest, a slight tone from over the whole thing, so that this circle, or the aura of the moon in the mist, has actually come to prominence. Because when an artist finishes a painting, what he does, he balances with usually pure glazes over the surface. And in this case, This stands out like a sort of archery target. It's a Grimshaw showing his feeding the mass market rather than painstakingly painting the best pictures. Price, I would have thought more like £15,000. 15. I mean, if it was a great Grimshaw, we're talking 30, so I'm going to say 15.
It's obviously a small, relatively minor work. And, that's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Good heavens. I say it again, it's the best one I've ever seen. You know, people tease me for saying it's the best I've ever seen, but this is the best fender I've ever seen. It's the most wonderful example of very late Regency brasswork. I say late Regency. In the 1807 to 1810 period, these designs, this is a Vitruvian scroll here with a palmet inside it. Okay, they were published in 1807 and were a style that was used and a motif that was used then for 10 years after that. In 1827, another book was published, and they started to incorporate squared off leaves. It's only a tiny detail, but instead of a rounded, like palmet, they squared it off in an angular form. And that became popular in the late 30s and into the 1840s. So while it bears all the hallmarks of a design by George Smith, who published these books in the early 1800s, this is actually a later version of it. So I would date this post-1840 to maybe 1855. Would have been made for an extremely important house. And the combination of black iron and this gilded brass, as it would have been, was quite dramatic. And then at the end, you've got this wonderful acanthus leaf over the top of the Vitruvian scroll. They are all quite important design features which put together give us a fairly accurate dating and the degree of importance that this has. So having said all that, tell me about it.
Well, I bought it 21 years ago at a shop at Thorpe near Colchester, and I paid £140 for it, and it was absolutely black when I got it.
Was it?
Completely black. Apart from here, you could see it was brass when you looked at the back of it, but it wasn't a very, it wasn't a really important shop. It wasn't a master. You didn't have it in the front of the shop or anything at all. It was
well,
just,
21 years ago,
yeah.
we didn't understand so much about Regency design as we do now. We didn't know as much then, and it was less fashionable. But it's amazing. This isn't lacquered, is it now?
No.
So
I
how long
polished it yesterday just for this.
Well, I'm sorry, I keep my fingers off. Yeah, sorry about that.
I polish it twice a year,
Right,
that's all. Christmas.
You polish it twice a year?
I only do it twice a year.
You take it all to bits to do it?
No, I don't. No.
What about a value now? I think if you were to try and buy this again, it would cost you nearer £4,000 today. Best one. I say it again, it's the best one I've ever seen. Thank you. Do you have any family history which might relate to Scotland by any chance?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes. It was left to me by my grandmother. She died in 1947. But both families originally came from New Galloway, Kirkcudbright, that sort of area.
Wonderful. Well, this is a Scottish sideboard. We call it Scottish Sheraton because it's in the style of Sheraton.
Oh yes, Sheraton.
And
yes.
that would be about 1790, 1785, 1790. And we would date it from the following features. First of all, you have this very elegant slight bow, 3 nice shallow drawers to the frieze, very careful choice of timber, giving all these wonderful waves going right the way through, standing on 4 of the most wonderful square tapering legs with spade feet at the bottom. The whole thing has a superstructure which is really peculiar to the northern counties and Scotland at this time, which is this box-like structure on top with sliding doors. You don't find that in southern counties furniture at this period. And here again, they have used the most amazing choice of timber and laid it as veneer so that you get this mirror image. And then right in the middle, not knowing quite which way to go, they put it upright. Absolutely stunning. The colour is as good as you'll ever see, and just enough marks on it to show it's been used as a sideboard. That's what I like to see. If we just have a look inside, one of these, this drawer will do, and I don't really need to because it all looks so right, but Those are the original handles. That's what a handle should look like inside. The little round nuts which hold the screw threads for the front of the handle, slightly sunken in, not totally flush, and wonderful quality throughout. Now, there is one thing about the sideboard which I don't know if you've ever noticed, but it's the mark of the most wonderful quality. When you look at it from the front, straight on, you see 4 square taper legs with a little spade foot.
Yes.
When you stand from the front and move to the side, you then see that the front leg is not a square, it's a diamond. And that is the most wonderful thing, because just imagine drawing that, let alone making it. It's the most complicated geometric thing to do. The man who made this was a master craftsman, and the man who designed it was a master. And I don't know if you have any valuation for insurance or replacement or anything like that. Well, if you wanted to replace this sideboard today from a good, and it would have to come through a good agent, a dealer, a gallery, you'd have to pay round about £25,000 for it.
How much?
25,000.
Really? Good heavens.
It's as good a sideboard as you'll ever see. The first thing we look at when presented with something that purports to be from the beginning of the 18th century, which this does with its wonderful veneers, is to see whether it can be original, whether it's made up, or whether it's all of one piece and a genuine thing. You look inside the drawers, and nice oak lining, which you see here, and the rules are that that should always be made of pine with a little slip of oak at the top. This was common practice and how most things of this type were made, most cabinet furniture. Now, when you see an oak at the back, it's either a nice oak one which has been veneered at a later date, or it is a Dutch or continental piece, okay? Mm-hmm. So we need to investigate further. So we look at the front, and here you've got Burr elm and Burr walnuts, and then you've got laburnum, which is we now call oysterwood. And we want to make sure that if these handles are original, then there will be lots of marks inside, and if they show on the outside, that will be quite fine, because that means they've simply been changed. If you don't see any scars on the outside here, but you do on the inside, then obviously it's been veneered at a later date. All right? Okay. Now, the nice thing is that if we look down here, you can see the scar of an old handle, and a little pinhole from another one. And here, we come here, look, there's a little hole, and that's where the Victorians put a rather large wooden knob. So it's had 3 or 4 sets of handles. So to make really sure, and to prove my point, we take the drawer out, and there you can see, there's the knob, the hole for the large Victorian one, and there are the other 2 holes where the split pins went. That's what I mean. Now, if the outside had not shown those, or evidence of those holes, you'd known that it would have been re-veneered or veneered at a later date, all that being replaced. So there's your authenticity. This was made round about 1710.
Oh, cool.
Yes,
Quite an old baby.
Yes, yes. Now, all is wonderful until we get to these legs. Those legs were not yet designed when this was made. Now, those were probably put on 50 years or 60 years after it was made. Now then, another nice thing you've got here is because of this veneer missing, we can see how it's made. Oh. And there you've got the most wonderful English dovetail, right, at the bottom of the carcass, okay? Yeah. And also one final guide to authenticity. When this veneer was cut, it was hand cut with a multi-bladed saw. And you cut it no less than 1/16 of an inch thick. It wasn't possible, it wasn't humanly possible to cut down a branch or across a branch accurately and maintain anything less than 1/16. It was too unstable. So this is hand cut, and it is thick as can be. Right. Wonderful. So there you are, perfectly genuine. Now tell me the family history.
Well, as I said, it's just been around in my grandparents' house and my parents' house, and then obviously I inherited.
Right.
But it's had a bit of a rough ride.
That bit of veneer came off when it was moved in a state car, and the lid was flapping, and the wind got underneath something and blew it.
And the top fell
We
out.
actually saw the bit of veneer disappearing down the road.
Yeah, I'd taken in one of the drawers.
road.
Yeah.
Despite falling out of a car, the condition is extremely good. You have to think of a value, what it was worth before it fell out of the car. It's not very different to now, actually. I don't think it did it any serious commercial damage. It is such a good-looking piece that it ought to be insured for $6,500.
Ooh. It's nice, eh?
Yes, it's lovely. Very nice. What a pretty piece of furniture from the 1780s, 1790s.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Pure Sheraton in design. And, of course, the latest fashion at that time was to show off all these exotic timbers. You've got this sort of parquetry design. Do you know what they're all called? Do you know all these names?
I should imagine there's something like amboina, rosewood, that
Oh,
sort of
very
thing.
good.
Is it?
Yes, absolutely. There's thuya wood, and there is rosewood, and that is probably king wood. And, oh, they're just all of the new exotic timbers that were being imported from the East and the West Indies, and it was fashionable to show them like this, to give this lovely diamond effect on the top. The rest of it, striking contrast, is this very black rosewood. Just a very dense black colour, contrasting at that time with white stringing of boxwood or sycamore, either white or green, and then the black. And so elegant, little taper legs, very smart thing. And then it opens up to make a games table. Now, I've never seen one without a loper. There's usually something to support. Because obviously people are going to put their elbows on, I would have thought. Anyway, it's as it was, totally original. And you've got a checkerboard top which you lift off, backgammon underneath, and if you wanted to play ordinary cards, there it is, a multi-purpose table.
I thought it was good that that hadn't been moth-eaten or anything.
Well, I think so too. I doubt very much, though, you know, if that's the original. This is, of course, this is sort of 1890s cloth.
I see.
The original would have been a coarser weave than that.
Yes.
And a greyer colour.
Yeah.
But
Sorry about that.
never, well, doesn't matter. We'll forgive it that. The original leather here, though, my goodness. I wonder how many fortunes have been won and lost on that. Now, tell me the family history with this.
It originally came into the family through somebody who was either the secretary or the valet to the Duke of Wellington.
Really?
And when he got married, the Duke of Wellington gave him this and a set of willow patterned, a tea set, a willow patterned tea set. My cousin said that she very well remembered when she was a young girl, her father was playing whist, I suppose it would have been in those days, lost.
Yes.
You must never lose at cards. He had a bad temper, picked up the original playing cards that they were playing with, which had gone with the table always, and chucked the whole lot in the fire.
Oh, how dreadful. What a shame.
So that's sad.
Yes, it is sad. But on the other hand, it's a part of history.
That's right.
And it's a reflection of the times and the character of the person.
Mm.
And as long as you keep the story with the table,
Yes.
you should write that down.
I have.
Excellent. Then and tuck it in the table so that
That's it.
in 100 years'
I
time,
took
when
it
we do
out-
this again.
I took it out when I brought it here.
Oh, excellent. Oh, well, then I'm telling you what you've already done. That's excellent. Well done. But such a pretty table. And with family history, which makes such a difference. Provenance is so important today. It is sufficiently valuable that if it got damaged or stolen, then you should have some form of compensation by insurance. And for insurance purposes, it's £8,500.
Thank you to the Duke of Wellington.
I bought it 6 years ago in Stowe, and I was a little concerned when I got it home to notice that the drawers seemed to be made out of recycled pieces of timber. I wonder
Really?
whether it's entirely original.
Let's have a look. I mean, I've seen nice oak lining, but
The underside.
Right. Now I see what you mean.
Well, you should see the second drawer is even more interesting, in as much as it's more brightly coloured.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. The other one?
And very similar.
All right. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this one on top of that one. Well, let me allay your fears first of all. There's nothing wrong with this. These pieces of furniture, particularly in the country, were made on large estates. And this was where they would have stored wood that was not used, whether or not it was carved, it was cut for a purpose, and then simply not used and kept in the workshop. And then one day, somebody was asked to make a little chest of drawers for one purpose or another. In this case, most likely a house on the estate or a servant's bedroom. And what should we use for the lining? Use some of that old stuff we've got in the corner there. You know, well, it's got carving. That won't matter. No one will see. And so they used these boards, which in this case were prepared, were made for panelling in a room. And if this was made in 1740, these panels were 150 years old. These panels are 1500, 1550, 16th century. Difficult to be precise. Either Tudor or early Elizabethan. And they are wonderful. I've seen, obviously, pieces of furniture with similar carving on, and I've seen sometimes some decorations, some pigment. We know that they used to paint a lot of furniture in the 1540s through to the 1580s. But never have I seen the pigment protected, as it were. I've never seen it as pure as this. This is like the day it was painted. Here you can see the thickness. It's a sort of tempera. It's a wonderful texture. And that's never really been corroded by anything. It's just never been touched. So these were stacked up for 150 years and then bunged into a little chest. And you can see where they've chamfered the edges off to make it fit. Absolutely stunning. Imagine, you know, a panelled room. These are from a panelled room, I'm sure.
It's not a Tudor rose, is it?
Well, yes.
Almost a stylized.
Yes, absolutely. A stylized Tudor rose, and this is a sort of almost a guilloche moulding, guilloche banding pattern there. I think they are wonderful, wonderful. What do you do now? I mean, sort of put them on the wall, and maybe you should protect. Maybe just leave them as they are. I don't know. Difficult to keep showing your friends every time they come round.
Yes.
How much did you pay for the chest?
£1,000.
Well, it's worth £1,000. A little fruitwood chest of drawers. I mean, certainly improved on that in 6 years. But these are a bonus. I suppose that panel is worth about £1,000, and that one £1,000.
It surprised me.
It's very exciting, very exciting. A pair of whatnots. Curious word, isn't it?
It is, yes. Do you know the origins of it?
Actually, no. I mean, really, they are étagères, stages, platforms, and were developed in the latter part of the 18th century from France. And then, during the 19th century, they became multiform, with columns in every shape and size, particularly by the sort of 1860s, 1870s. In the 1880s, it started to get very much more elegant. A renaissance of classical style came in, and superb quality whatnots developed like this. And I think that name stemmed from the fact that somebody would say, "Where shall I put this, mother?" And they'd say, "Well, put it on the whatnot." And the name stuck, absolutely. Yes. I can think of no other reason. No. Now, this very style is typical of the makers of the 1870s, 1880s, the top quality. They're Crace and Son, Holland and Son, and of course Gillows. And they followed this line of ebony and a strong contrasting timber. And then you'll see here, outside this, framing it, is this strong ebony colour, black ebony, and then this beaded edge, which actually sparkles. And a note of quality is the amount of it there is round all the edges. And another piece of quality are 2 drawers in each. Usually one either in the base or sometimes one in the top, but one each end is pretty good. And nice to see the original little knobs here with their carved wood fascia. And when we open the drawer, there you are. You've got Gillow & Co., the magic name. The magic name. If you pull the two together, there are just slight differences in the pattern. You can see there you have a plain groove or a reed. Here you have a little heart at the top, a little heart shape. And there's a slight difference in the size of the turned feet.
Yes.
So not quite a pair, a matched pair. Gillows had innumerable differences, slight differences in their patterns. It really, to all intents and purposes, matters not. Now, any maker's name on a piece of furniture adds to the value, not only the historical value, also the monetary value. And in this case, of course, Gillot is probably the greatest increase in any name on a piece of furniture, certainly in the 19th century. Now, have you had these a long time? I mean, this is sort of
No, we've just had them about 3 years. And,
oh, really?
Yes, we saw them in a local antique shop. We thought they looked so neat and well proportioned, and then we realised that they were Gillot. We just liked them, thought they were very attractive.
Oh, they're charming. They're as good as you'll see. If we take this little piece here, that would cost today in the region of probably £4,500 to £5,000 without the name on. With the Gillot's name, double at 9,000. A pair, even a matched pair, would be certainly 22,000. They are so desirable, they're so fashionable. These are ideal pieces of furniture.
Wow, that's amazing.
And you bought extremely well. The story goes that in the 1790s, a Captain Davenport ordered from Gillot's, the famous furniture makers of Lancaster, a small desk. And it was from that beginning that all small desks of this type got their name, the Davenport. The early ones were very plain until about 1810. They were just simple little boxes with a row of drawers and a top which slid forward like that to enable you to sit at it.
Yes.
The Victorian ones were permanently that shape, rather like a school desk.
Yes.
This one is quite exceptional for many reasons. Firstly, it retains its original little gallery here, and it has the most wonderful little fitment at the side, so I'm going to pull that round. Just here, when you open the lid, you pull a lever inside, and out shoots your little compartment for ink and stamps, pens, whatever, seals as they would have been in those days.
Yes.
One of its other interesting features is the arrangement of these shelves which slide out each side.
Yes.
Right. Now, in order to preserve the proportion, when closed, it has to balance up both sides. So they've made the lips of the trays almost a deceit. One folds over the other. So the lip on this side comes up, the lip on that side goes down. While we're around this side, and this is quite a rare feature, is that instead of a bank of drawers as you normally expect, there's a cupboard door inside of which is an arrangement of drawers with these military-style handles, flush handles. Now, let's have a look at the whole thing. And another unusual feature are these columns. Now, that particular shape of column gives us a fairly accurate date of post-1810, but pre-1825. Tell me a little history about it, from your point of view.
I acquired it about 40 years ago. I was very interested 10 years previous to that, but it was only until the person moved that I was able to avail myself of it.
The whole quality of the piece, as I've said, is superb, and it takes it out of the ordinary range of Davenport price, because there's so many made from each period. I mean, it's an extremely popular piece of furniture. If you were to see 100 Davenports, you'd be lucky to see one of this model.
Really?
A good average Victorian Davenport will make 2,500 to 3,000. A good Regency Davenport of the normal pattern, the model, will make 6,000 to 8,000.
Right.
This one should certainly be insured for £12,500.
Gosh.
It is among the best Davenports you'll ever see. Looking round, I can see some very early pieces of carving on what is traditionally known as this monk's bench. So describing a piece of furniture which first looks like a table, you lift up the top and it turns into a seat. Now, there are many of these around, and I suppose in some 40 years I've only seen a couple that might actually be totally genuine. So let's hear the story of this one from your end.
My husband and I were married in 1943 when the war was on. It was impossible to get new furniture if you wanted it. And we both liked old furniture. We were given the princely sum in total with our wedding gifts of £10. And we saw this in a local dealer's window and we both wanted it. And it was 10 guineas. And when we went in to buy it and he heard that we had £10 wedding gifts, he said, to you, £10.
Isn't that a nice story?
Yes.
That makes it rather a special piece of furniture, doesn't it?
Yes.
If we take the top off, I'm going to ask you if you're very kind and pull that plug out. That's it. I'm going to put that over here. Right, now let's have a look at it. This piece here of carving here is very early. Certainly early 16th century, could be late 15th century. 1480, 1520, that sort of period.
Oh.
It's absolutely wonderful. But it's out of something, it's come from something.
Yes.
It wasn't made for this.
No.
And if we look at the seat, this is quite new. This
Yes.
is 1850, 1860.
Yes.
Could be replacement, but is it built up? That's what we're trying to establish.
Yes.
Look at the column on your side. A split column, a piece with a baluster, that wonderful, wonderful crusty colour surface to it. But then look at this one. Totally different. Equally early, not as early as that, but 17th century, both of these. The gun barrel stem, 1640, 1660, either just before or just after the Civil War.
Yes.
Now let's tip it back and see. Here, we've got lovely chipped carving, but it doesn't balance. We've got this palmette up here, some arcading, and then nothing that end. This, again, almost certainly from the 1660s. At the latest, could well be 1630, 1640. I think this is one of the best examples of the period of 1850 to 1870, when you could go into Soho in London, where you bought pieces of early furniture and commissioned their being manufactured into something else. So while some of this is 1480s to 1520, some of it is 1630, some of it is probably 1690, the rest of it's 1850 to 1860. So let's just put the top back on again. We don't need, we need not put the pegs in, just leave it like that as we started.
That's right.
Now, they still have a market value.
Really?
Oh yes. Oh yes. I mean, it was still a reasonable investment
Yes.
at the time. Your £10 has certainly turned into, today, the best part of £2,000. Now, Lord Cholmondeley, of all the wonderful things that are on display in the public parts of the house, these items have come from the private apartments, haven't they?
Yes, this has always been in the hall, the entrance hall downstairs, and under one of the mahogany tables, and used as a waste paper basket, I'm afraid.
with the side
very
open.
practical.
You could always put a liner in it, I suppose you want to do that. There should be a pair to it.
There is a pair.
There is a pair.
Yeah,
That's the other side.
The other
waste paper
side.
basket. You're coming in or going out of the house. Well, they're plate buckets. That accounts for the fact that it has a gap so that you can lift the plates in and out. And they were carried from the kitchen to the dining room in pairs and carried on a yoke. So you did, I mean, they're so heavy. Anyway, that's quite heavy with that. Yes, milk pails. So they've sort of carried them in pairs. This is rather a nice size one, and probably for dessert plates rather than dinner plates.
Right.
It's got a particularly pretty little brass mount around here, which is sort of 1810 to 1815, which is about the right date for these things. They sort of tended to go out of fashion by about 1830, and weren't introduced as such until the sort of 1780s, so they're fairly short lifespan. And their value, I mean, in pairs usually today between £6,000 and £8,000, depending on their size and quality. But of course, as soon as you have a provenance like this great house, then prices can make anything, because in the future it means that someone's going to own it and say, well, this came from Hatton Hall.
Yes.
So I think we have to ignore the provenance side and say a pair of these should be insured for, say, £7,500 to £8,000.
Really?
But as their provenance makes them unique, then they couldn't be replaced.
Well, I think we certainly shouldn't be using the squeeze paper.
Well,
I should find another use.
Put a few plates in just to remind you what they're for.
Exactly.
And then we have this
lovely.
extraordinary wassail bowl, which is made of one of the most dense timbers known, which is lignum vitae. If you threw that into the lake, it would sink.
Really?
Oh, yes, it does not float. And this was a wassail at Christmas time, and you toasted your friends. They're almost big enough to get into, isn't it?
Like a sort of punch.
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Sure. With apples and alcohol and all sorts of things. I mean, it really is a stunning piece. It's one of the largest I've ever seen. There is one maybe a tad bigger, but if not certainly the same size, in the Victorian Albert Museum, which has a crisscross pattern cut onto it, and the original fitments to go in those little holes. Those were little cups with a spike on. And I suppose 1640 this was made.
Really?
Yeah.
Very early.
Yes. Where does this live, by the way?
This lives by Sir Robert Walpole's desk in the library. Doesn't have any purpose. It just sits there.
Don't sort of throw anything into this, eh?
No, well, I suppose with a lid. But
that stands on the floor.
But really, it should be exhibited.
This, in today's market, could easily make £25,000.
Really?
Yes. So pop it on a table now.
Definitely.
Well, of course, the most important feature here is that particular scroll.
Really?
First drawn by a man called George Smith in a book published in the early 1800s. He published another in 1826, which included an acanthus leaf like that. So the combination of those two gives us a date for the table of 1826 to 1830.
Yes.
It's got this lovely rosewood, which is in such good condition, nice and untouched. And these wonderful scrolls come down here, all complementing that sort of date. So is it a family table?
Yes.
Oh, lovely. It has the feel of it, you know.
It was, I remember as a small child, sitting round the table at Christmas playing cards.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it's a tilt-top table. The type is known as a loo table because it was invented for playing the card game of loo.
Oh.
But it became, obviously, synonymous with any large round table. I'm going to lower this down, and what, I mean, you've got these marvellous panels of inlaid
brass.
marquetry brass. This was a feature which began in the 18th century and then was revived after 1815 in London. This has been stripped down, which is a great shame.
Yes.
What happened?
They had a fire in the house before it didn't actually get burnt, but it got...
Smoke damage. Yes, that is a shame, obviously, because the base is in virtually untouched condition, and stripping it off like that, you know, is a pity. But nevertheless, it's still a most interesting table, and quite a valuable table too. A table like this would cost you about £15,000 to replace.
Would it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, it does look nice when you see it down.
Absolutely.
Looking at it like this.
Winning buyer, winning seller within the family. I think you should get a good discount. Well, that's a pretty good discount because, well, you paid £300. I think you'd have to pay £3,000 today.
Goodness.
Dutch, or to be more precise, it's Frisian.
That's what I was going to say. How do you know that? I'm supposed to tell you that.
Because my mother, to whom it belonged, comes from an old Frisian family in Holland, and this was passed down to me after she died.
We're talking here about the 17th century, and this is a time when Holland was obviously a wealthy country. The tulips, of course, the famous tulips until the early 17th century were very expensive items. The tulip bulbs made the Amsterdam traders very rich. Holland was a great seafaring nation at the time, and of course the farming was always very rich, but very, very provincial. I think it's difficult to imagine quite how provincial that would be.
The family were seafarers and merchants, in fact.
Right.
For many generations,
And it probably would have taken quite a lot of money to buy a piece like this in the 17th century.
There's an awful lot of work gone into it. I mean,
well, there has. I mean, I love the various mouldings here. I mean, you've got this one here, which was almost like a thumbnail, an overnail, like scale pattern really here, and then you've got a variation of it, like a sort of ripple moulding here, but all done by hand. This is not a machine. This is one man laboriously carving each little piece out like that, which I love. And I'm rather stuck here. I mean, this is sweet. The hearts. That's very nice indeed. So it may have been perhaps a marriage coffer.
Well, I was told that it was a marriage coffer, and that they had them at the foot of the bed for putting the linen in or something.
So in that case, we assume these are billing doves.
You know, I've never noticed the birds there. No, they are birds, aren't they?
Two amorous birds, two lovebirds, let's say, for the marriage chest.
And the date, would that be the date of it was made, or the date of the wedding, maybe, or something? Is that 1701 on there?
I think it's 1701. There's something about the cutting. I don't think it's the same hand. If you look really closely,
it's very crude.
Very crude and very, very deep compared with the subtlety of the rest of the carving. So it probably is later. You know, with these provincial pieces in any country, it's very difficult to date within 50 years. So, I could say 1650. It could be 1700. What's anything inside that's interesting?
I don't think particularly interesting. No.
It's fairly original. That's nice.
Is that a candle box at the end, or?
Candle box, yes, traditionally, and a lovely lock. Oh, it's a snap lock. Oh, that's a wonderful period. So that lock is 300 years old or so, and still working.
Should snap shut when you close that.
Let's just try. Let's just try. I think so. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yes. So heaven help you if you've taken the key out and you can't open it. It snaps locked, and that's it. But what a nice piece of furniture. Now, I suspect that you probably know more about the value of this than I do, because
I don't.
You haven't had it valued recently or anything?
No, not at all.
I think at auction in London, a pre-sale estimate of about £2,000 to £2,500.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And I think that would probably be bought by a Dutch person or a Dutch dealer over to the Netherlands. I could see it in an Amsterdam shop for probably £5,000, something like that.
Oh, right. Well, it is nice to know.
It's a very early piece.
Yes, lovely.
And part of your history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
So do you know what this type of furniture is called?
I know it's bull furniture, but we don't know how to spell it, or what variation of spelling it is.
Because you get different spellings, yes.
That's right.
It's actually Boulle.
Right.
After André Charles Boulle, who was a designer and furniture maker working in the court of Louis XIV in the late 17th century. How long has this been in the family? I'm trying to date it.
My husband's family were mill owners, and they built the big house in 1828, and this, I think, is the original furniture. It's been in there since 1828. I
think it just misses that date.
Yep.
I think, though, that this is a French one, and it must be a bit later, 1845 or something like that. I can't quite see it as being as early as the 1820s. Where's it been? It looks like it hasn't been used for a long time.
They've all been in a room upstairs under wraps. They haven't seen the light of day for 40-odd years.
Well, it's a wonderful Dickensian image, isn't it? All covered up and all getting very dusty. Because clearly it would all clean up a bit. You've got pieces missing. And if you look at this, you can see where the brass is missing. You can see this material here, which is called tortoiseshell.
Right.
So under here, and if you cleaned it with olive oil, which I don't recommend you do yourself, but you'd see it would be a sort of deepish browny colour, almost with the red coming through.
Yep.
And in fact, it's nearly always turtle shell. People popularly think that this black furniture was mourning furniture, but no, it wasn't. It was a very popular style, competing with the Chinese black export furniture of the 1830s and 40s. Became very, very popular indeed. And this good quality metalwork, not the best, but good quality, nicely sculpted, with a very good face in the front here on either side. You've got a drawer on one side, blank on the other side. Stands well, looks good, and this is better than most. So a piece like this, what do you think it would bring?
Couple of hundred. Couple of hundred?
A couple of thousand.
Kidding?
A couple of £1,000, certainly. Just this single piece on its own. Right. Cleaned up in an antique shop with the restoration done, £5,500. But also this is yours, I understand, as well.
Yes. Yep.
Now this looks like it's had a rough life. Has this been stuck in the same Dickensian room?
No, it was in the cellar for 50 years, I think. I've never seen it. It's the first time it's been outside. And I think I'm the only one in the family that likes it. I love it.
I think it's great. Because what is interesting for me, it's the same period as the Bull table.
All right.
It's the Bull revival. This is the Romantic revival of the 1840s. The sculptor here is Theodore Gechter, who was a very, very good sculptor. He's cleaning up his signature a bit. And this is a French romantic. He's one of the Crusaders, Charles Martel. And this is the king of the Saracens, about to have his life terminated by that axe in his back. And here you have a couple of camp followers in their mighty armour holding up these wonderful Roman-like standards with all their trophies. Because I think you've got a garniture here worth, cleaned up, retail, £8,000.
8,000?
8,000.
I think I had it in the sale.
This cresting here is completely wrong. I think it's been made specifically to go on this chair to replace an earlier cresting, for whatever reason. The other one might have been broken, damaged or lost or something like that, or simply offended whoever it was. Yes. Or also, there's a third dimension for that. A lot of this period oak furniture was carved up in the 19th century. And this type of carving, I would guess, is sort of certainly second half of the 19th century, possibly even 1880 to 1900. Right. Because there were clubs of, you know, people would go to evening class to learn about carving. And this is certainly amateur, and I suspect that's what's happened here. So whether somebody replaced it because they preferred that. And the problem is the iconography is lost a little bit, because with this cresting is later and means not a lot to me. It's some sort of rather mad-looking man, isn't it, here? Yes. But was it bought in this part of the country? I mean, what, in Yorkshire or
Sheffield?
In Sheffield,
right.
Yes. Because there's something about this back, certainly the square panel back, and more importantly, the marquetry here is more typical of Yorkshire, or more specifically Leeds. When you think that this chair is basically middle of the 17th century, 1640, 60, that sort of date. Right. So Leeds was one of the biggest towns in the country outside London. Wealth, money, and the opportunity to build really an important joiner's chair in oak like this. Yes. And they favoured marquetry like this. You can see how thick it is, where this piece is missing. Yes. Great big thick chunks inlaid in there, including, I think, probably mother of pearl there by the look of it.
Yes.
And it's of tulips, and of course tulips at this time were very valuable indeed. Whole estates were wagered and lost on the price of a tulip bulb. And when the tulip crash came, many, many people were ruined, because one tulip bulb was worth thousands of pounds.
Tulip mania.
Exactly. So that's all part of the decoration and aesthetics of this period. But when you look here, it's interesting, because with the cresting later, when you look at these denter or teeth mouldings, as they're called, these are clearly, this shiny colour here is not 17th century. And when you look all the way around, I suspect they've all been replaced.
Well, it did have some restoration work done on it about 10 years ago, because this was a family piece that was knocked around by children and dragged here and there for parties, and lots of these fell out.
What do children do in a party on this?
Oh,
Dance
they sit on it,
you
know, the birthday person
oh, right,
at the
the
head
king's
of the
chair.
table.
Yes, yes, oh, lovely, lovely. But there are lots of wear on the arm. It's nice, genuine wear, perfectly genuine 17th century arm. And again, very nice decoration down here. The front and the sides have got this nice lunette, as it's called, incised carving, which is all perfectly period and genuine. Often has been copied in the 19th century when people were carving up with plainer oak pieces, but this is all perfectly genuine, in my opinion. The problem is his values. I mean, it really is a problem. Dramatically altered, I'm afraid, by the back. If that cresting was right, I can see that in a shop for sort of £4,000, possibly even more, something like that. But unfortunately, because of the cresting, it's made a huge difference to the value.
Yes, yeah.
And it might be more realistic to put only £1,000 on it.
Right.
Just because of that, unfortunately, major alteration.
Yes.
I bought it in Dorset, so is it a Dorset piece? I don't know. I don't know that much about it.
Right. But looking at the whole shape of it, it's a Welsh dresser, basically. But what's interesting, this idea of the three drawers with the arch in the middle is more typically from the Brecon area.
Oh, right.
And what confirms it to me is the fact, have you noticed that this shelf is much wider than this one or the one below it?
Yes.
Do you know why that is?
Because bigger plates would have gone here, meat dish or something, I don't know.
Right, but recent studies have determined that it's more subtle than that, and this is fascinating. In Brecon, traditionally meat plates, the big decorative meat plates, wouldn't be rectangularly placed like that in a landscape form. They'd be placed in a vertical portrait form. So you needed a higher shelf.
That's just aesthetic, is it? It's
purely aesthetic, but it's a regional characteristic of just Brecon. So that alone is enough to say it's Brecon for me.
All right.
I'm just going down to the base now, because there are one or two things just very quickly to point out. It's unusual to have this chamfered leg. It would normally be a ring-turned leg in Brecon. He's either very fashionable, this man, or he didn't know how to turn.
I see.
You're missing the front and back stretchers, which you probably realise. But what would be really nice to replace is the would have been boards, 2 to 3 boards running left to right.
Yes.
And that would obviously set it off a bit.
Yes.
And I think that's probably worth having redone.
Really?
Because it's an unusual dresser. It's a nice size, it's the original height, it's not very big, cottage furniture. I could go on for a long time on this.
I brought it in to find out whether it's worth having restored, because I wasn't sure whether the plate rack was original to the base because of it being a different material.
Totally original, totally original. So how long ago did you buy it?
A year ago, almost to the day.
Right. What did you pay for it a year ago? This is always the difficult bit.
£4,000.
4,000. Well, I was going to say that it would make £2,500 to £3,500 at auction. I think it's a fair market price, and I think if it can be well restored, I mean, I think I'd have put $4,000 to $4,500 for insurance. So I think you're already beginning to recoup the payment you've made, and I think if you have it nicely restored by a good restorer, it's going to go up really quite quickly. It's a good buy, and I'm really, really excited to see it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm pleased that you're pleased to see it.
The wine cooler is clearly mahogany from the Regency period, but what is interesting about the books you brought along with it is that the books stopped before the Regency period. The age of satinwood was around up until about 1800, and the Regency wine cooler is from 1810, 1820. So when this was written, here we are, 1904, nobody considered the Regency period at all. So here's a major book, one of the first ever really serious dictionaries of English furniture, written by this well-known Percy McCoy in 1904. I think the last volume was 1908, not talking about Regency furniture at all. 1800, that was the cut-off date. McCoy, who wrote these volumes, he was a decorator and advisor to wealthy people. He left part of his collection to this museum in Brighton. And of course here you have an oak chair, probably Flemish, circa 1500. But we now know, because it's in the museum, that in fact it's a fake, made in probably the back streets of London about 1850, 1880, that sort of date. So the first item, one of the first pieces you come to is a fake. And this is one of the problems with this book, and also fascinating, that a lot of the pieces were actually fake. Just moving on, this one, we've got the age of mahogany, and it's strange when you think this is the mahogany period he's writing about in this volume, and here we have a piece of walnut, a walnut cabinet. But there's no question of it. This cabinet like this, these wonderful oyster veneers, which is typical of the William and Mary period, wouldn't have cabriole legs like that. Probably have an extra drawer and on a low bun feet or a low stand.
Yes.
So here's a major colour plate in the book, and it's clearly not right.
So the people who are named in the book wouldn't actually have known this, would they?
No, not at all. Here we have two pieces by William Kent from Houghton Hall in Norfolk. And when he was using these pieces, they were perfectly right. They weren't fakes at all. The books are really rather a descending investment, whereas the Regency piece is ascending, so at least it compensates a bit. And these were reprinted in the last decade, and of course the value has gone down a bit. A set like this, probably between £400 and £500 in a shop. The Regency piece of furniture here, which looks like it's been in the family for a long time,
Yes, it has.
that's going up in value. I think that you could certainly expect an auction value of £2,000 to £3,000, and I think therefore if you wanted to insure it in a shop just cleaned up a little bit, probably even slightly more than £4,000 today.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Now we know.
Yes, now we know.
Do you know what date this is?
No, I don't know. I know how long ago I bought it. I bought it 35 years ago.
It, to me, is a very classic part of English furniture history, 1820s.
Is it?
Late Georgian.
I didn't know that.
Regency. So it's typical of that Regency period. I mean, the end of the Georgian period, beginning of the Victorian period. So when things were starting to get a bit fussy, but I'm not going to call this fussy at all because it's right at the time when things were very, very, very elegant indeed. I like the shape of it. I like the size of it is very nice and generous. But you've had it 30 years. I mean, what about this colour? I mean, we've got a bit of a contrasting colour. If I start here, it's very, very faded, where it looks like it's been in a bay window, and then...
Yes, it has been in a bay window.
And I go all the way around
to
when I get to you. It's almost, the natural colour, isn't it?
Yes, John didn't like the curtains being drawn. So it stood in the sun.
It's a working table.
And it was the morning sun, which I think is supposed to be worse.
Well, it hasn't helped. I mean, it's quite a nice colour. It's lovely timber. I have a feeling that it might be Scottish. Whoever made this knew what he was about. An Edinburgh maker, Glasgow maker, who could afford a very good quality. You know the timber?
I don't know the timber it's made of, no.
Well, it's...
Is it mahogany or not?
That's it.
Yeah.
You do know the timber.
Right.
Yeah. Mahogany, beautiful mahogany, very, very nice indeed. I mean, what have you had? Have you had it valued? It's a great piece of furniture. I like it.
Yes, but I had it valued and I didn't believe the valuation on it, that's all. Because I put too much on it, what I thought it was worth.
That's an unusual way round. May I ask you what they put on it then? What did they put on it?
They put 35,000 on it.
Well, fairly recently, or yes, must have been.
Yes.
Yeah.
About a month ago, 2 months.
That is too much, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I know.
That is too much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great looking table. What I think makes a huge difference to this table, unfortunately, it's a working table. Did you put this leather on?
It was put on before I bought it. We didn't put it on ourselves, no.
Because somebody has, I'm afraid, made a big mistake with this. This was never designed to have a leather top.
No, all right.
This is not a cross-banded edge. This is a solid mahogany all the way around.
Yes.
And what somebody's done, it was solid slab of mahogany or veneer of mahogany going right across the whole table, and somebody has cut it out quite nicely to let a leather top in flat.
Yes.
So it would have been originally all this lovely mahogany, figured mahogany. If it was made to have a leather top, well, it would have had what's called cross-banding, so the grain would be in different directions. It would be this way around here, the grain running like that, and then pointing down towards the back of the piece.
Yes.
So that's the giveaway with this.
Yes.
And that is going to make a huge difference to the value. That ought, I'm afraid, I've already taken quite a bit off your 35,000
Right,
as a result of that.
Well, I didn't believe it myself.
Well, I think you were right instinctively. But just before I value it, look at that base. I mean, isn't that fantastic, the edge of this? I mean, when it stands and you look at it, this great big corbelled base here, this trestle support with an anthemion or honeysuckle from Greek art. This is a Greek revival of the 1820s. And these lovely paw feet with these great shells holding the feet together. I think it's a great looking piece of furniture.
Yes.
I can see somebody like it, I can see you falling in love with it, and I can see you using it and enjoying it. But we have to revalue it, I'm afraid.
Right, right.
Minimum of 10, possibly 12,000 is more realistic.
Yes.
Because it's great.
Yes.
And you've obviously had fun over the last 30 years. What did you pay for it then?
When I bought it, I paid £600 for it.
Oh. If only we could all go back in time.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
I mean, this type of coffer or chest, the original shape is called an arc. And these originally were taken off. They had loose hinges, and people would knead dough in them.
Oh.
Which is extraordinary. That's why it's that shape. It's not for getting the extra blanket or the extra piece of linen in. It's actually for kneading dough.
Right.
It's so incredibly domestic. You wouldn't believe it, would you? What a great shape that is, though. Where does it come from?
It comes from Holland, and it was bought by my husband's aunt in Rotterdam in the late 60s.
Right. And actually bought in a Rotterdam shop.
Yes.
I wonder if it's a little bit more north than that. There's something about the way these legs stick out that reminds me of that sort of sledge type furniture that was often in Friesland in sort of northern Denmark. Again, what date is it?
I have no idea.
Not going to hazard a guess.
I have no idea. No.
It's, well, between about 1620, 1640.
Goodness.
And what I think is fascinating is when you look at this decoration, I mean, all this is fairly typical. English and Dutch, North European furniture has a lot of cross similarities at this time. I love these arches, but it's unusual to get them sticking out like this. There's little, where the top arch sits on the pilaster, on the column here. And the fact that this is 350, 400 years old, and some of these are still intact, but it's got a lovely charm about it. And it's got a colour which you don't often see on English oak. So it's a family piece, and it's been, what, since the 60s?
Yes, yes.
Is it a highly prized value piece?
It's very loved in our family, yes.
How much did you pay in guilders for it in the 60s, do you know?
I don't know in the 60s. We paid my husband's aunt 1,000 guilders for it. It's about £300. We paid her for it.
That seems quite a reasonable price for a good piece of 400-year-old furniture, doesn't it? How long
That's
ago
what
was
she
that?
asked. We paid for it about 5 years ago, 6
That's
years
pretty
ago.
good, isn't it?
That's what she asked for it, so...
I think, winning buyer, winning seller within the family, I think you should get a good discount. But that's a pretty good discount because, well, you paid £300. I think you'd have to pay £3,000 today.
Goodness. Okay. Right, to write them a cheque, I think.
Mother bought this in a jumble sale about 65, 67 years ago.
Oh, wow, right.
Yes.
In a jumble sale, how wonderful.
Yes.
What a thing to find, because it's very heavy to cart around in a jumble sale.
I wouldn't make the choice very
And it's
far.
made of black Belgian marble.
Belgian marble?
Yeah, yeah.
Ah, good.
And it's not Belgian or French.
No, no.
What nationality do you think it
We
is?
thought it was maybe Italian.
Very clever, but wrong. It's English.
Yes.
This is made probably on the Duke of Devonshire's estate.
The
at
Duke of
Devonshire, Chatsworth.
Oh, yes,
in Derbyshire.
yes.
And there's a difference between this type of marquetry, which is pietre dure, hard stone inlay,
yes.
the Italian marquetry, and the English marquetry. Yes. The English is much more complicated, much more difficult to do. This is a solid marble top.
Yes.
And what's happened is they've cut these little holes in to let this into the main surface. The Italians have a thin veneer of marble on top and cut out a little stencil, if you like, which is an easier, still very difficult, but easier technique than this very typical English technique. Sort of Ashburton area of Derbyshire, a lovely, it's a great little marble table. I mean, it's such a pretty size and so fresh, because the date, we haven't talked, is about 1840 or 50.
1840?
Yeah. It's a lot old. It was already 100 years old or so when it was bought by your family, at least.
Yes.
Now, I've got to value this because I think it's a great piece of furniture. Insure it for £5,000.
5,000. Very nice. Very nice.
This desk has been around all my life. It was bought by my father shortly after the war when my parents were setting up home, and it quickly found its way into my bedroom as a child. About 10 years ago, one of my friends came round and asked if it was by somebody called Barnsley. He knew more about furniture than me, which set me thinking. And I bought a book and did my research, and it made me wonder if indeed it was by either Barnsley or by Jimson. So, over to you.
I think that I'm going to start with the date of this. I think it's 1910, something like that. So relatively early of that. It's late for the Cotswold school, if you like, but early for the relatively early for the Barnsley Jimson type piece of furniture. But what I'm going to do is quote Ernest Jimson's great nephew, Donald Jimson.
Right.
Because he's often called in to be asked about, is this by Jimson or Barnsley? And his reaction is, most of the time, I don't know. He can't tell. The books don't really tell you. And I don't think we know. They didn't sign their furniture. There are no labels on it at all. Let's have a look at the inside first, just to see. You say you had it in your bedroom?
Oh, it looks like it.
We're using it for homework?
Mugs, I should think. Cups.
And what a shame the hinges have been replaced.
Yes, that's one of the things we want to get sorted.
Yeah, interesting. It'd be quite a problem to sort out, but it's worth doing. So let's get back to the question: who designed it? It's very strong, isn't it? And when you actually stand back from it and look at it, and that wonderful wishbone structure underneath, it's very, very good indeed. So clearly, it's by one of this arts and crafts school, and your friend was on the right track. I think this type of furniture is really underrated. It's English furniture at its best. I mean, Jimson himself knew William Morris. And it was Morris who told him to go with Barnsley to London, to an art school of architecture, where there were people like Norman Shaw, some of the great architects of the late Victorian era. And they've carried that through into the last century now, into the 20th century, that tradition of crafts making. And there are no nails, virtually. It's all handmade, as you expect in the early days, 16th, 17th century. The idea of all these dowels or pins here is typical of the arts and crafts movement, back to basics, and all the better for it. I think it's lovely. Made, of course, of solid oak. You don't find much around. What would you pay for it today?
Well, if it were Barnsley, I would think it might be worth around 5,000, but I don't know. That's a guess.
And if it were Jimson?
I would have thought something similar, but I'm
about the same.
Yes.
I think that I think it would make that at auction in this present state. So I think if you're insuring this, probably even 7,000 or 8,000, and it's going up. Any idea what period this is?
Well, I've always been led to believe it's Georgian, but I don't know. I don't know for certain. Okay.
George III.
George III, right, splendid.
It's about 1770.
Yeah, right.
Now, this form of table, before we go into the exact date, was virtually invented, or certainly promoted, by a Scotsman.
Right.
A Scots architect called Robert Adam.
Right, oh, right. What wood is it?
Mahogany. But it's not the best mahogany, and it's got a lot of wear and tear. It looks like a family piece. How long have you had it?
I've had it forever, as long as I've been around, and as far as I know, it's been in the house in which I live, in which my family has lived for 200 odd years.
Right.
So that's all I know about it. It seems to me it's surprisingly high. Is that about the height?
It's typical of the period. It's a carving table, basically.
Right.
And you can see this wear and tear it's had here. I mean, this is 250 years of wear and tear.
Yeah.
This is more recent. It's a vase of flowers or something like that somebody's put on there.
Yeah.
Typical. Don't do it, please.
No, right.
Have you ever noticed one little added extra it's got on it?
What?
I was just crawling around underneath, and under here are 3 finger marks. You see these? The little gouges here.
Yeah.
Right. If I put my fingers in there like that and pull.
Oh no, I never knew that existed.
Isn't that nice?
Well, It's a total surprise. I didn't know it existed.
It looks like it hasn't been open for a while. It's a bit dusty there. Look, it's hardly ever been used. This. See, it's very clever.
Yeah, yeah. Good heavens.
But also, what I like about this, I mean, it's got a lot of sophistication about it, yet at the same time, you know, I love this fluting here, this sort of copied from ancient Greece, this fluting. But then this, what's called an oval patra, this flower head here. But I can't see it on this one, but the one here, that's actually nailed on.
Good heavens.
Look, little
Oh,
nail.
yes, I see, yeah.
So whoever made this probably didn't make these. Somebody else made them. He bought them in and just stuck them on.
Yeah.
Interesting for what is a sophisticated piece of furniture.
That's not cheating? No. Well.
No, it's perfectly genuine piece. So we need to value it. I mean, it's Georgian furniture, I think most people know, has gone up in value recently. Have you had it valued in the last few years or anything? Has there been any valuation on it?
It was valued for probate when my aunt died, which is 3 years ago. And I think it was, they valued it at £12,000, which seemed to me an extraordinarily high figure, but I don't really know what I'm looking at, so that's what it was.
It does seem an awful lot of money, doesn't it, for what is essentially just a side table and a bit scratched.
Right.
Well, I think that today, for your insurance policy, you should insure it for £30,000.
Thank you very much. That's totally amazing.
I can remember this table when I was just a wee small lad, probably about 4 or 5 year old, at my grandparents' house where they used to live in Watford in Hertfordshire. I know what it's made of, but apart from that, I don't really know what period it is or what its value is. So,
you say you know what it's made of. I'm going to test you now. What's the wood then?
I suspect that's. I don't think it's burr oak because I see no medullary rays in it, but I suspect it's burr elm.
Well, I didn't say that to trick you. It's not a bad guess, and I like the way you've gone through the process of oak with medullary rays, etc. And you're quite right, it's not oak and you can't see medullary rays. It's actually not an English indigenous wood at all, or a British wood.
Thuya wood? Thuya?
Well done. Now, you should have said that first time. It is Thuya wood. Do you know where it's from, the Thuya wood?
West Indies, isn't it?
No, it's from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco.
Right.
And it came into this country, or into the British Isles, into use really through France. And of course, because the northern Morocco, North Africa was a French colony, and they found the wood and first used it in about the 1840s and 50s in regular quantity.
Right. It has the whole thing has a very French look and feel to it. French stroke Italian to my eye. Certainly not of English. You mean that's not an English piece? Design style-wise, I wouldn't have said.
Right. I'm going to push you now because it's interesting. You've got your own thought process going. So why isn't it English then? What?
Quite probably it's English construction because the quality of construction is extremely high throughout. I mean, the dovetailing on the drawers and the drawer slip in here. It's all tells me it's very, very English. But in terms of construction, but the style of it, it's just not English furniture.
I don't think I need to be doing this, do you? You're doing very well on your own. You're quite right. I mean, that's exactly English drawer construction. Wonderful mahogany, lovely sort of caught and beaded moulding there. Typical of what you expect of an English drawer. But of course, in this, it's not Italian style. I call it more a French style. Right. And when you look at the base, those sort of columnar supports, is typical of what they'd call the Louis XVI style. Right. And that style became very, very popular from about the 1850s onwards. Of course, there were lots of political troubles in France, and a lot of French craftsmen came over to England to work. And French designers were very, very sought after in England and paid more than their English counterparts to bring in this very sophisticated French design. And the ormolu here is typical. And the ormolu is an English word for bronze d'or moulu.
Yeah.
So it's just simply gilt bronze, or actually it's brass, amazingly, but we always call it bronze. It just sounds better. But the colour of that is more typical of the English colour of metalwork. It's a good piece of furniture. I think that if you had it in a showroom done up in a London or showroom where they like this type of high quality, high Victorian furniture, I can see it being £6,500 to £7,000 retail price.
These were made as labours of love by the artists, as just great bits of porcelain, but now they're expensive treasures too. The whole concept just works together so well.
These four here, I haven't got a clue where those are dug up. These two were from a lake in Shropshire.
Lake in Shropshire. So, did you know who found them?
They were my dad's. So he's a bottle digger. Well, he was a bottle digger.
The curious thing about bottles, it's one of the odd anomalies in antiques that for these, the worse condition they're in, the more valuable. Collectors actually love them when they're all decomposing and almost falling to bits, rather than the glasses that look clean, because I suppose when they are this age, it's nice to think that they have survived. The purpose of these bottles were to serve wine rather than to store wine. They were used mostly in public houses and in grand houses to fill the wine from the cask, and then you would serve a bottle at table. They really were a great English invention. In the 17th century, they started to make this very dark bottle glass, and that was really very much heavier, stronger than other countries had made, and it became a new thing. They replaced the pottery bottles previously used, and everybody wanted their wine served in glass bottles. And we've got a bottle here, the tall, thin neck, and rather squat onion bottle, known as a globe and shaft, is about the earliest type, and this dates back to the middle of the 17th century. We're looking about 1660. And gradually the shape changed to a little bit more squat. We find that this shape, which dates from about 1675, 1680, and here you've got the seals on the front. Normally these seals were the signs of the inns and taverns where they were used. Here you've got what looks like a lion, so I guess it was perhaps used in a public house called the Red Lion or Golden Lion or something like that. Gradually the onion shape developed. This is the classic onion, obviously named, and these came in at the beginning of the 18th century. They have a lovely high kick-in base, which allows more area for the wine to come into contact with the glass, and it cools it. You place these into a bucket of ice or cold water to cool the wine, and the shape is now becoming more practical for that purpose. And then gradually they became a little bit taller, and these would date from 1730, 1740, possibly up to the 1750, getting more and more taller, gradually coming into the wine bottle shapes we know today. The value in these depends on precisely how early. The earlier they are, the more valuable. And the presence of a seal like this adds to the value enormously. I mean, this type are very surprisingly expensive, but the problem with this one is he found the neck and the base separately.
Yes, he said he found it in two pieces, and he put it out, you know.
He's done it nicely. One's seen that the base is deteriorated separately to the top, and you've got the iridescent decomposing there in a different way. So had it been a perfect bottle to find, then you'd be looking at about £1,500, even 2,000. Broken is still worth 300 or 400. This one, being sealed from this period, even with damage, you're looking at £500. And these are found in much larger numbers. A nice onion bottle like this will cost you about £100 today. And I think they're great bottles to hold. And going down to about £60 for later ones. So if you can go back to the lake where he got these, wonders how many more down there. Find a few more of these in good condition, they'll be £1,000 each, well worth going for a dive.
Lovely, thank you.
It's really crucial to work out precisely when this bracelet was put together. And I've just been talking with our jewellery expert, John Benjamin, and he confirms that the gold mounts with the fittings and the composition, which is a very classical shape, would have been made in the Georgian period. It dates from the end of the 18th century, or perhaps around about 1800. And that's really very important because the pieces of glass which it's formed of contain decorative techniques which weren't reinvented by the Venetians until the middle of the 19th century. Prior to that, they hadn't been made since Roman times. So what we're looking at is a collection of fragments of Roman glass mounted together at the end of the 18th century. So, do you know a part of its history at all?
I don't really. All I really know is the fact that it was left to me by my mother, and prior to that, I believe it was given to my mother by an old aunt of hers. But apart from that, I would love to know its history.
It was just come down in the family as a little piece of jewellery. I mean, when the pieces of glass were discovered, they would have come from archaeological excavations as fragments of wonderful pieces of Roman glass, bowls, jugs and vessels. When they were found, they certainly didn't look like this. When we turned the back over, it shows the unpolished surface. Here is how the glass would have looked. These little fragments are in their raw state. By being in the ground, glass decomposes and develops a silvery iridescence. As a result, the collectors polished them again, and by repolishing, as the Romans had done originally, the colours inside the glass come out, and these are the colours from, they all date from round about the 1st century AD. So we're going back to almost 2 millenniums, I suppose, ago. And to think how they did it. I mean, the techniques here really were wonderful methods of making glass. The patterns, they contain, well, there's this one here, that's millefiori, individual canes. You've all seen the glass paperweights, which contain little pieces of rods of glass, like coloured sticks of rock, assembled together. Here they've made little patterns in the glass and fitted them around. That would have probably been a whole bowl, maybe that pattern all over it. Next to it, even more remarkable, we've got latticino. This is individual twists, little candy cane twists of one colour glass set within clear. So the yellow glass twisted up and laid down side by side and remelted into the side of a bowl or a jug. And so many techniques which became forgotten. No one knew how they were doing it. The Romans were able to practice so many techniques that we always think of as Victorian ideas because no one knew until then how it was done. Here, right at the end, that last piece contains, there's a flower head and other patterns of little flowers and beads, all made of coloured glass. They would have rolled that little flower in one coloured glass petals and then melted it all in together to form the patterns. And these would have been marvellous, extremely valuable treasures in their day. The complete bowls were really quite wonderful. Very few survive in intact condition. A few have come from excavations complete. They were normally repolished and put on display in the museums, but collectors were glad to hold just fragments of them because even the little pieces are scarce and they show the technology that the Roman glassmakers invented, and then the techniques became lost for a long, long time. I mean, these pieces, which were assembled, they were shaped to fit into a nice piece of jewellery, and here a collector had this made at a time when there was a great deal of interest in the Roman world. The excavations at Pompeii had been working. Maybe some of these fragments had come from excavations like that. Who knows, this might have been part of a suite of a matching necklace and another bracelet once. That's often how these came in the 18th century. To think the pieces are even older, and we've got a very valuable piece of jewellery because it has value for two reasons. The glass pieces are precious. Even fragments of these rare glass are valuable because complete bowls are worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. They just don't exist. Very rarely come on the market. Even fragments are worth hundreds of pounds each. Some of these pieces alone can be worth many hundreds of pounds. Adding those up together, we've got a fair bit, and mounted in such a wonderful way in a period piece of jewellery which is so smart. Somewhere perhaps 6,000 to 10,000 pounds.
Heavens.
It's just lovely.
It's beautiful. I definitely won't wear it now.
Tell me about the piece itself. Do you know about it?
Well, I've had it for about 20 years. It belonged to an aunt of mine. She had it, I don't know for how long, I suppose again about 20 years. It was given to her by a friend and admirer. How long it had been in his family, I don't know.
It just goes back as long as, beyond what you can remember anyway.
Absolutely, yes. Mm-hmm.
With the factory mark, Bermontoft's Faience, grand-sounding name, used by the Leeds Fireclay Company. Mm-hmm. They started as an architectural firm making glazed bricks and pieces for buildings, and they got into the great Victorian craze of making art pottery, particularly vases and models of animals in bright-coloured glazes. Mm-hmm. And then around 1880s, about 1886, 1887, they employed a very skillful decorator to do the Anglo-Persian style, as they advertised it. And this is the mark of the painter, a little monogram here, which is taken to be an L and a K, and that mark appears on all the factory's pieces in this wonderful style, but the sad thing is, we don't know who it belongs to. The mark was clearly someone very skilled, who understood high Victorian taste of the time, but we don't know their name at all, so remains anonymous. And because of that, it perhaps gets condemned a bit as a copy of the better-known William de Morgan pottery.
Yes, I've heard of that.
You know, the great designs of the time. And de Morgan's pieces, inspired by the same Islamic art, were the height of fashion in the 1880s, shown in great exhibitions in London. And the Leeds factory felt, well, we can do just as well.
Yes.
And I think in many ways they did. When you've got the thought behind the design, it really works so well. The way these snakes coil around, and the background with the little plants just growing up inside there. It's probably not yet in the same level as William de Morgan, who will always be the great leader of the field. But even a good old Bermontoft piece is certainly going to be, I would think, £4,000 or £5,000.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
I mean, we've got sort of a great range of pieces here. I mean, this is the most unusual clock. Where did this one come from?
Well, that was given to my grandparents on the occasion of their marriage in January 1907.
Oh, right. Well, we can probably sort of get quite close to it by looking at the year code. Worcester put a code on all their pieces. We've got the mark underneath, which is somewhat smudged there, counting the dots, 12, 13, 12. We've got 1905 it was made.
Oh.
So in stock a year or two, given in that occasion. Most unusual to get porcelain clocks, and a little painted scene there, not signed by the artist, but I think that's probably the work of William Hawkins, a great flower painter. I say one feels with the porcelain painters and the artists at Worcester that you always know them because living in Worcester myself, as I did, their families are all around, and Dad introduced me to so many of the painters and people whose artists and signed on your pieces of porcelain. Are some of these by your family members?
Yes. My grandmother was a Fildes. Her maiden name was Fildes. And Madge Fildes, who worked at the Porcelain Works for a short while, was her niece. And I feel very privileged to have two pieces that were actually painted by her. Probably not of great value, but they are to the members of my family.
Well, they become special pieces, aren't they?
Yes.
I mean, a great painter of roses particularly, and flowers, and that sort of atmospheric shaded background, which Worcester so specialised in.
Yes.
But that's the nice thing. And then your family have been collecting and buying pieces after that?
My father particularly had a great love of Worcester china, and this is part of what he has left to me.
Did he know the painters himself?
I'm not sure whether my father actually knew, but certainly my grandfather, who was a well-known character in Worcester, he certainly knew Harry Davis and the Stintons.
Right, and we can see their work here. I mean, of course, Harry Davis means a lot to my family because Dad knew him very well. I was just a very young boy. I was 9 years old when I met Harry Davis and would spend hours as a boy watching him paint. And I can see the magic name Harry Davis on this one. You've got some very unusual pieces. To get this subject, he's famous really for his French-style landscapes and sheep. Here you've got a little cottage scene.
Yes.
I mean, that's very unusual to find. What gorgeous flowers growing up there. You can imagine yourself sitting by the cottage, as of course Harry would have done. He did little sketches and watercolours of local scenes. Is that a local building, do you know?
I would think it's somewhere around Worcester, but I just feel that the flowers look as if they're almost growing. They come out as if they're alive. Absolutely amazing.
But that's the magic of porcelain. Somehow the colours are sealed there and they never change. We're looking at them now as they were painted. And a great big vase there by another marvellous artist. There's the work of Charlie Baldwin. Bird lover through and through, and sweeping swans growing around there. Nowadays collectors are of course keen on wares, and the value goes very much by who painted them. And a little vase by Madge Files will be £250. A cup and saucer about 100, so not little bad. But moving up in the scale of the artist's work, your clock, which was their wedding present clock, family piece, is going to be, for its rarity alone, probably £800, £1,000. Then moving up to the top artists, and Harry Davis there on a vase and cover with an unusual scene. I suppose it's going to be £5,000.
Pardon?
£5,000 now for Harry Davis vase. The painters themselves would have been shocked at these values. He'd never earned that in his life, poor old Harry. But here, a vase that size, in that quality, you're probably £8,000.
Pardon?
And a vase by Charlie Baldwin is going to be £7,000.
Goodness me.
No, I mean, it makes you think really. When these were made as labours are loved by the artists as just great bits of porcelain. But now they're expensive treasures too. Being so close to Worcester today, I hoped I'd see some nice Worcester porcelain, but you've brought along a really very special piece, and the likes of which I've never seen before. Oh, tell me about it.
Well, it's made by the Grangers, in George Granger's time, and it's come down through the family. In fact, I've just established that George Granger was my great-great-grandfather.
Grangers were one of the great porcelain makers in Worcester.
Yes.
I mean, here's the name on the back, G. Granger & Co. Worcester. And they were the other Worcester factory, the smaller factory, the other side of the city. And Paul Granger is generally thought of as being nothing on the same league as the great Royal Worcester factory. But here is a piece that shows just how good Granger could be.
We think it was made about 1840, and it's been handed down generation and loved. And the story that my mother told me was that it's an extra from a set that was made for Queen Victoria to give the Tsar. But we haven't been able to corroborate this. In fact, we approached the Worcester Museum, who had no record of it.
Yes. And the Hermitage in Russia.
Oh, right, so you've been researching all around.
And the Royal Collection.
And the Royal Collection also had no record.
Looking at the piece, it has, of course, proud in the middle. They're the arms of Queen Victoria. And in the panels around the border, you've got the different royal palaces. You've got Windsor Castle there.
Yes.
That must be Buckingham Palace. And
I think so.
There were the little figures, charming figures in the foreground there. And there we've got the pavilion at Brighton.
Are they hand-painted?
Beautifully hand-painted.
We've looked at it through magnifying glass, and it's amazing.
The gilding there, this amazing rays and barbs, I mean, it's just unlike any other English royal services. All the factories made pieces for Queen Victoria and for William IV beforehand, but this is so much more splendid, more eccentric than that. We know that there were pieces made for the Queen Victoria and services which went back and forward between England and Russia, but this never went. This stayed in the family. So is this some sort of sample? I mean, with this quality, why didn't they get the order, I wonder? But what I've never seen before on Granger or any other factories is these model flowers stuck on the plates in addition. The little roses are each made by hand and stuck on.
Yes, you couldn't eat off of it, could you?
Not very easily. Could you imagine even in a royal palace trying to carve your feet off there? Maybe it was just a bit too silly. They've gone over the top, and the order wasn't placed. How do you value a royal plate in a family like that? Have you thought about it?
No.
Well, we thought, but we don't know.
It's not even insured.
I mean, maybe £4,000.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Well, basically, they're my mother-in-law's, which I think she got hold of about 35 years ago. She actually paid £160.
Right. The work of Charlie Baldwin, the Royal Worcester Factory.
Yes.
And Charlie Baldwin specialised in swans. I mean, during his career, he painted many, many hundreds of vases, usually with swans flying around the vases. What makes these so unusual is the swans are swimming. And that really does make them different. And it'll be interesting to see just what date they were painted. They'll have a mark on the bottom for the factory year code. Right. The year marker, little dots around the Worcester factory mark. And here this one's got 8 dots. That makes it 1899.
1899.
And that is that makes sense because that's quite early for this decoration. Most of Charlie Baldwin's swan vases are painted between 1900 and 1904. And they're a very formal pattern, but they're not very detailed. These are, well, really much more real swans, but they look more fluffy. And that's, I think, very typical of the early work of Charlie Baldwin. He did the whole lot, all the decoration. He will have signed them. His signature is just there, neatly painted, C. Baldwin. And well, not ignore the vases themselves. These modelling of the handles by James Hedley. I mean, the whole concept just works together so well. I mean, it was a new, light, airy style of decoration which Worcester was just working out, and they were to become enormously popular.
Right.
Both at the time and indeed now. So we're going to look at, say, £15,000, perhaps even £20,000.
Really? Gosh, you'll be happy with that. That's great. Really good.